approach the dais. If you want to sign up to testify, feel free to fill out a public testimony slip at the desk in the back with the Sergeant at Arms. Chair, we're ready to begin.
Good morning and welcome to today's hearing on early childhood care center closures. I'm Rita Joseph, Chair of the Education Committee. Thank you to everyone who signed up to testify. We're looking forward to hearing your testimony. On January 14, 2025, a day after Mayor Adams released his preliminary FY 2026 preliminary budget, New York City Public Schools informed 5 early child care centers serving low-income families that their leases were being terminated and their programs would not be renewed for the upcoming school year. This abrupt announcement, less than 24 hours before applications opened for the upcoming school year, left families and providers scrambling for answers, which raises serious concerns about transparency and stability in the city's early childhood education and early child care system. These 5 centers, all 5 children daycare, 6 in South Jamaica, Young Minds Daycare in Bedford-Stuyvesant, Friends of Crown Heights 29 in Crown Heights, Bushwick Child Care Center in Bushwick and Nuestros Niños in South Williamsburg, serve nearly 300 children. Families rely on them for affordable, high-quality early child care, which benefits children, parents, and communities at large. Following public backlash, as well as pressures from public advocate, the city comptroller, and several council members, New York City Public Schools since reversed course, and on February 14, 2025, it was reported that providers of all 5 centers were granted contract extensions through June 2026. While this temporary extension provides some relief, it does not address larger issues that led to the situation in the first place. New York City Public School officials cited several reasons for the shutdowns, including new rent rates at almost double the price, low enrollment, and similarly program available nearby. However, several questions remain. For instance, Nosotros Niños reportedly has around 80% enrollment with 96 students. But Mayor Adams justifies closure by stating that only 4 children were registered. How does New York City Public Schools count enrollment, and why is there such a stark discrepancy? Advocates have reported that New York City Public Schools' delay in approving providers' contracts contribute to these inconsistencies, creating administrative challenges that undermine stability for providers. Additionally, several providers have expressed that the city fails to make timely payments that have severely impacted their operations. Despite multiple attempts to obtain guidance from New York City Public Schools and repeated invoice submissions, providers continue to face a lack of support in navigating the invoicing process. Further compounding financial strain and administrative difficulties, this issue was also raised at our 2023 hearing on 3K funding cuts and delayed reimbursement at early childhood providers, as well as 2022 hearing on early childhood programs in New York City. Why do these persistent payment delays continue to plague our early child care system? Why the 1-year contract extension announced last week provides short-term relief for families and providers? It does not fully resolve the uncertainty surrounding these programs. Having the building leases been renewed, or will providers operate on a month-to-month lease agreement? More importantly, what plans are in place to ensure that the sustainability of these centers and other similarly situated centers beyond June 2026? The future of early childhood education and early child care should not be determined behind closed doors. At today's hearing, the committee is seeking to understand the decision-making process that led to the proposed closures of these centers. Today's hearing will also provide an opportunity to learn from these events and develop long-term solutions to prevent future disruption, ensuring stability in early child care for families and providers. Thank you to the members of the Education Committee who have joined us today. I would also like to thank committee staff Nadia Jean-Francois, Chloe Rivera, Andrew Lawless, and Grace Amato, as well as my own staff, Giovanni Piquant and Joel Desouve, for their work on today's hearing. I also want to acknowledge my other colleagues who are present, Councilmember Hudson, Councilmember Narcisse. Finally, I would like to remind everyone who wishes to testify in person today that you must fill out a witness slip, which is located on the desk of the Sergeant at Arms near the entrance of this room. Please fill out the slip, even if you're already registered in advance, that you'll be testifying in person today. Also note that we will not be voting on any legislation today. To allow as many people as possible to testify, Testimonies will be limited to 3 minutes per person, whether you're testifying in person or in Zoom. I'm going to ask my colleagues to limit their questions and comments to 5 minutes. Witnesses who are here in person will testify for those who are signed into Zoom webinar. I will now call the first public panel, the impacted providers, before turning to the administration. I will now turn it over to Nadia. Stephanie Garcia. And Ingrid Changanaada. Are you here? Also like to acknowledge Councilmember Riley on Zoom and Councilmember Sanchez. I will now turn it over to Committee Counsel Nadia Jean-Francois to administer the oath. Okay.
Go ahead, you may begin your testimony.
Sorry. Okay. So, good morning, Chairperson Joseph, members of the Education Committee, and the esteemed guests. My name is Ingrid Matias Chungara, and I'm the Executive Director of Nuestros Niños, a beloved institution that has been a pillar of the Williamsburg community for over 52 years. I come before you as an advocate for 96 children and families, 97 of whom are children of color, who now face the devastating loss of their early childhood program. We have 1 year extension due to a sudden and unjustified decision made without any prior notice or opportunity for dialogue. With less than 24 hours notice before families were set to register their children for the next school year, on my school portal, we were blindsided with the news that our lease would not be renewed, no conversations, no due process, no regard for the impact of our children, family, and staff. The decision was made based on 3 points that were never given the chance to discuss, address, or giving correct information on. Under-enrolled, which we were able to disapprove because we were in fact meeting enrollment requirement, and the administration had the data based on the Bendo portal, that we had no budget approved, and there was a miscommunication on that end. Oversaturated seats in our district, and according to the administration, on unreasonable increase in rent. When we finally had a conversation with the administration, we were told that this was not about the quality of early childhood program at Nuestros Niños, but rather the cost of our space. Let me be clear. Reducing the future of our children to a financial equation is deeply education should be a priority to all of us. It is not if it's not, what does that say about the city's commitment to preparing our children for a bright and successful academic future? If quality is not factored in these decisions, what does that say about our value as a city? We should be expanding and improving early childhood program across New York City, not shutting down schools that have been doing the work for over 5 decades. If we truly invest in early childhood quality education, we wouldn't see the persisting achievement gaps that leave so many of our brown and black children struggling in state math and English language arts exams. Nuestros Niños is not just another program. We are one of the last remaining Latino-led early childhood programs in Williamsburg, serving children and families who have historically been marginalized and underserved. If we were forced to close within 1 year, currently our children would be displaced. Educators who have dedicated their lives to fostering early childhood education will lose their jobs. And families, so many of whom relied on our culturally responsible programming, would be left without limited or no viable options for their children. The consequences of this decision are severe, unjustified, and unavoidable. We ask that the City Council to urge the Department of Education, the Mayor's Office, to reverse the decision and renew our lease. Our children deserve better. Black and brown children deserve better. They deserve a city that prioritizes their education and values the programs that help set them on a path to success. We cannot stand by and watch a trusted, community-rooted institution led by people of color disappear. We ask you to take action to protect our children's future. We ask you to call on the administration to do what is right and negotiate the renewal of our lease. We ask you to save nuestros niños and to protect our children's future. Gracias. Thank you.
Sanders, are you here? You can come up to the panel. Turn on your mic. Turn on your mic.
Okay. Good morning. My name is Stephanie Garcia, and I'm here as a mother, a lifelong New Yorker, and a product of this city's public school system, from Head Start to Hunter College. I grew up in Williamsburg, Brooklyn, and I have seen firsthand how vital community-based organizations are, especially for working families and those experiencing financial hardships. The truth is, income instability can happen to anyone. I was earning over $100,000 a year, living paycheck to paycheck like so many New Yorkers. When I lost my job in June of 2024, my biggest concern was ensuring my son had access to quality early childhood education and care. I was relieved to know that my 2-year-old would be the 3rd generation in my family to attend Nuestros Niños, a bilingual Reggio Emilia-inspired program that provides not just education, but nourishment, stability, and a sense of community and culture. Every day, my son and 95 other children receive two home-cooked organic meals and 2 healthy snacks in a warm, culturally responsive environment that feels like home. The South Fourth Nuestros Niños location, which is now facing closure after just having our release renewed for 1 more year, that also provides meals for the 2 other locations that we have, a total of 156 students. That is over 600 meals a day. But here's the problem. Nuestros Niños has been operating without budget allocation since July 2024. Think about that. No funding, yet they continue to show up for our children. If this is what they can provide with no money, imagine what they can achieve with proper support from the DOE and the mayor's office. We cannot wait for the house to be burning before we act. Affordable early childhood education should not be a luxury. And yet, the New York City Department of Education has failed to communicate, failed to plan, and failed to prioritize the families that rely on these programs. We didn't hear the news from the DOE. Instead, we learned the shocking news through parents that Nuestros Niños lease was not being renewed. Parents discovered this when they tried to enroll their children in the 3K program in January, only to find out that Nuestros Niños was missing from the application portal. The DOE failed to conduct even the most basic investigation into why their database inaccurately reported low enrollment numbers. Instead, they chose to abandon over 150 families and 80 staff members, leaving them to scramble for affordable care options and jobs in a city that seems to have forgotten its own people. This careless decision has thrown countless lives into chaos, all because the DOE refused to take responsibility for their own errors. And this is not just about one school, this is about accountability. The DOE is responsible for $39 billion, 1/3 of the city's budget, yet they routinely show up unprepared to hearings like this one, have incorrect data in their databases, and make rash decisions. It's a running joke at this point. How can we trust an agency that is this disorganized to make the best decisions for our children? Chancellor Simone Hawkins wrote in her op-ed in AM New York, as a lifelong New Yorker who's attended our city's public schools and sent my daughter to an early childhood education center, I know firsthand the impact of affordable childcare. Well, where's that understanding now? She once ran 14 child care programs herself, so she should know exactly how strained Nuestros Niños is. But it seems like once she started making over $250,000 a year, she forgot what it's like to be a struggling parent in New York City. So I ask, where is the DOE's accountability? To the families who rely on these programs, to the children who will one day be the future of this city, to the city council, and to the community-based organizations that they contract with. Nuestros Niños is the only extended 2-day the only extended day 2K program in Williamsburg and Greenpoint. It is one of the last remaining spaces that truly serves this community, one that has been deeply affected by gentrification and displacement. Losing it is not just about closing a school, it is about erasing history, a legacy, breaking a support system, and failing the next generation. We need answers, we need funding, and most importantly, we need a commitment from the city to keep Nuestros Niños open, because childcare should not be a privilege, it is a necessity. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd also like to recognize Councilmember Stevens, Lewis, Lee, and Hanif. Mr. Sanders.
Thank you, Chair Joseph and members of the New York City Council Committee on Education for convening this important hearing and for the opportunity to provide testimony regarding the pending site closure of Bushwick Child and Family Center operated by Grand Street Settlement. We also want to thank our local council member, Sandy Nurse, for her tireless support of families in the district who rely on affordable child care. Councilmember Jennifer Gutierrez for her support as a champion for universal child care, Brooklyn Borough President Antonio Reynoso, State Senator Salazar, Assembly Member Davila, and Congressmember Velasquez. And finally, we want to thank DOE Deputy Chancellor Simone Hawkins for collaborating with Grand Street to help us reach a solution that will best serve the families in Bushwick. In this hearing, we're calling on the Adams administration and the New York City Department of Education to extend our lease at the Bushwick Child and Family Center, located at 319 Stanhope Street, or find an alternative space in Bushwick to ensure uninterrupted services for our preschoolers. Grand Street Settlement is a 109-year-old multi-service settlement house that operates a network of center-based child care and educational programs across Manhattan and Brooklyn. Our programs serve working families and their children, many of whom live in NYCHA housing and face multiple obstacles to education, health, and economic prosperity. Grand Street focuses on early childhood education because it is an early life investment that improves children's opportunity to achieve optimal health, education, and social development. And it equips parents and support them with lifelong learning as they continue to guide their children's success through school families, but we're at risk of losing a much-needed childcare facility. The administration's decision to close Bushwick Child and Family Center, along with Nuestros Niños, Friends of Crown Heights, and Fort Greene Council, adversely impacts early childhood education and historically underserved communities like Bushwick and Williamsburg. We recently hosted Governor Kathleen Hochul, and she noted the positive impacts our center has had on children and families in Bushwick. Since its inception in 2012, the Bushwick Child and Family Center has been a respected community pillar. The site is fully enrolled with 69 out of 70 children in seats currently, and one student is stuck in the DOE's enrollment portal. These planned closures will have devastating ramifications for working families in Brooklyn who rely on affordable childcare options. Essentially, 70 children and their families in our programs will have to scramble to find new childcare. Some will be unable to find affordable childcare options, potentially impacting their employment or forcing them to pay thousands of dollars in childcare. The city's median tuition expense for childcare is $24,000 a year. This is an untenable alternative for families, as nearly 20% of all Brooklyn residents live at the poverty line, according to United States Census data. According to a recent report from Robin Hood, families in which a parent faced childcare-related work barriers were 1.5 times more likely than other families to experience material hardship a year later. The data underscores the need for subsidized childcare options in communities like Bushwick and Williamsburg, but the research also suggests that we should develop additional childcare centers rather than dissolve brick-and-mortar sites that have been historical safe havens for our families. Site closures will also have a devastating impact on community members. If our child care facilities close, 20 of our dedicated staff members may lose their careers. These are dedicated early childhood educators who provide robust care for children. In closing, we encourage the Adams administration to work with us to find a solution that maintains the vital child care services that we provide for our families in Bushwick. On behalf of 70 families in Grand Street, thank you for the opportunity to testify.
Well, thank you for your testimony. I have a couple of questions for you. Have you encountered difficulties in submitting invoices and getting your rosters approved?
Not as of recent.
We're still waiting for our budgets to be registered to be able to submit invoices, so we haven't been able to.
And how long have you been waiting?
Officially back and forth since September,
Since September?
yes.
How much money does DOE owe you in unpaid invoices?
I wouldn't say unpaid invoices because we haven't been able to submit invoices. I would say from July to the present, if we do about $1 million of service that have been provided, and Nuestros Niños has been able to foot the bill.
And you have not been paid ever since? Do you find that you find support if something is wrong in submitting your invoices? Who do you reach out to?
So we have a contact, a financial analyst, that I send emails. They sit on inboxes, don't get a respond. I have to go to the next level.
How often does it, how long do you have to wait for a response?
Weeks.
A week?
Weeks.
You mentioned that you first learned about the closures from families in your program. What, if any, communication support did you receive from New York City Public Schools?
Since the notice,
When you heard about the closing, you said you heard it from families.
so I heard it from my chair, who heard it from elected officials.
Okay. Okay. So it wasn't firsthand source. It was a secondary source. Okay. And once you found out and you reached out to New York City Public Schools, what were you told?
I didn't reach out. The elected officials reached out and set up a meeting, and we were put in a room together, Zoom, and we were informed of the 3 main points that were used to make the decision.
And what was the reasoning behind them closing the locations?
So one was under enrollment, oversaturation of seats in our community, and our lease coming up for renewal.
Oversaturation. Okay. Does New York City Public School communicate what's the plan for your program beyond June of 2026?
No.
So you have no idea?
No.
Okay. What has been the response from the families that you served?
It was a relief to be able to apply for an additional year, but families that have 2-year-olds, then they know that the following year they wouldn't have a program to attend. So it's disheartening for our community
Absolutely.
to really hear that.
Is there any other providers within that area?
So we have 3 other sites, in 2 sites in Williamsburg, but no program that service the model that we do.
The amount
And
that you
our
do?
2K program, it's the only one around.
Yep, 2K programs are very rare. Most folks don't know about Early Learn. Is there another bilingual program? You talked about it being bilingual, culturally responsive. Is there another bilingual program within that area?
Besides Nuestros Niños, no.
So you serve a unique niche by serving 2-year-olds second, nutritious meals, and bilingual education.
We also have a Reggio-inspired philosophy, which is, if families were to pay for that outside of our program, it would be thousands of dollars.
Yeah,
And they're
childcare is
getting-
very expensive in New York City. $23,000. I think that's what you quoted, Mr. Sanders. Anything you want to add on?
It's my understanding right
Speak into the mic, please.
My apologies. It's my understanding right now that the Department of Education and the School Construction Authority is in conversation with the property manager to best find a solution to either extend the lease for us.
Okay, and did they give you a timeline?
Not that I'm aware of.
But you are in conversation.
Yes, our executive team is, yes.
Okay. Could they have done a better way of communicating this? Could this have been done much better in terms of communication? Don't be shy.
May I have some time to consider the question?
Absolutely.
Yes.
I always feel like I can say this on the record. Communication informs how you make your moves, right? How you serve your families. So communication becomes very important in how you talk with your stakeholders, right? These are families being impacted. And if this is the only childcare center in the neighborhood, you're creating a childcare desert. And where do families go, right? We want families to work. And we know when families don't work, what happens to that. Anything else you want to share on the record? It's not the time to be shy, guys.
No, I just want to say that I'm thankful for the conversations that have been happening with the Department of Education. So we were able to have a meeting with our family worker team last week, with the enrollment team, and clarify so many questions that the team had. And that was very powerful conversation. I was glad that we had that. But those are things that should prior for us to being in the situation that we're in. And also moving forward, we're gonna have monthly meetings. I think that it's key also in programs that have been identified as low enrollment in order to be blindsided the way that we were. Because if that's the case, having that conversation even a couple of months ahead of time, we would be like, okay, we could build on this, but nothing was done. Now it's being done, and I'm grateful for that opportunity, and my team is grateful. So I have to thank the Deputy Chancellor Hawkins for that, and her team for putting that together.
I want to echo that sentiment. We're grateful for the DOE for continuing the negotiations and discussions. Like Nuestros Niños, we've been in communication with the families, had an open house, invited elected officials and community stakeholders just to see the value add of the Bushwick Child and Family Center, and we're keeping them updated as these negotiations happen. But we are thankful that this hearing was convened and that the vitality of the community center is being considered.
This council, on the record, is committed to early childhood. We are committed from day one. Minute I walked in here, I was committed to making sure we stabilize the sector. This is such an important sector, and this is how you invest in the future of New York City, is to invest in the earliest learners. And that's research proven, that if you invest in young people as early as possible, the future will be brighter. Even when we talk about other economic disadvantage that you talk about, most of your constituents come from NYCHA. You're removing that barrier, right? That barrier, bringing that barrier down by investing in early childhood. I'm gonna now turn the question over to Councilmember Narcisse.
Thank you, Chair. I'm listening to you, and from the business aspect, if you don't get the money that you give the service. If you don't get the money, the staff cannot get paid, and then we cannot continue whatever we're doing. That's the bottom line. The same thing for Department of Education. If they don't receive money from the federal, from the state, from the city, they cannot function. So I don't know what make them think that you can function without the money, the contract that we agree on to give you. I'm gonna say from a business perspective, from being in the business world, I want to say I am so sorry, because you're doing a work that it is changing the fabric of New York City. That's mean we address the inequity in education, because most of the time, the places that we're not able to function to educate our children happen to be in the community where you're serving. So having said that, if that budget cut, not reverse, what is our early childhood look like in New York City? Your thought?
Well, we see the data. We know when New York City's public school children when the exams come out, state exam, we know that we're not doing what we need to do. So we, as the chairwoman said, we need to invest in early childhood. We know that a child's brain develops from 0 to 5 at 90%. So if we're not investing in those early years, then what is expected for those children as they go on? So this is the foundation. Mm-hmm. So I hate to use the word quality versus quantity, but I think that's what we're faced on. And I think when we're looking in New York City and we're looking at the disproportionate rates of our children lagging academically 3rd and 4th grade, where our children are not reading or doing math at a grade level, and that we're more than 50% of our children are not, that is disheartening. As a mother of 4, that is disheartening that we're not investing in early childhood. I come from the business world before I did early childhood. I work to put my children through quality early childhood program, and I understand the benefits of that. And that's why I'm so passionate about the work that I do and the commitment that I have done for Nuestros Niños in the year and a half that I've been there. And I'm committed to provide those children, those brown and black children, with the best education that they can, that is not gonna cost their parents $50,000, $60,000, but that they could get it for free. And if our city cannot do that, then I don't know what we're doing as citizens.
How's your payroll? Because if you're not getting money, you're not getting paid, and those educators, how are they getting paid?
So we have payroll tomorrow.
And then where's the money?
I begged, I put a loan out.
I didn't want to take you there, but I have to take you there because I know I've been there, where the money's not coming and you cannot make payroll. So how is it?
I'm sorry.
That's okay. That's okay. So they want to know that it's real when you cannot do it. Go ahead.
I clean our accounts. There's nothing. We have nothing. 52 years of savings, of having a cushion, it's all gone. There's nothing. But I needed to make sure that my staff got paid tomorrow. So my HR called me this morning. She goes, Ingrid, are we going to be able to process payroll? And I said, give me a minute. And I took everything. I mean, it's barely nothing there. But my staff had to get paid tomorrow. And that's why I do this. And there's no way that I could go home and just think that they were not being able to have money. Especially, it's the end of the month. It's the first time in Nuestros Niños history that we had to apply for a loan through the city. I sent an email yesterday. I responded. I'm still to hear from anyone.
And your bank is not giving you a loan. I'm sure
And
that.
I applied for a loan through the bank, but that takes weeks. That takes months. But also we are using money that we're not getting interest off. So it's like we're giving the city of New York a free loan. I do fundraising. Since I started Nuestros Niños, I had 2 successful gala. And that was to implement a Reggio program. But that has all gone to the day-to-day of the organization.
And I don't even have to ask you how you sleep, because when you cannot make payroll, knowing you have staff waiting for you, I know it's a lot of stress. And
I don't sleep. I have lost 15 pounds through this process because it's so unheard of that a decision like that could be made and a call cannot be made prior to get the data straight, to figure out what's going on. And I felt I've been doing this work for over 20 years, and I work in corporate. I know what it is to work for someone that doesn't care about you. And the reason why I made the transition to nonprofit was because I thought that this was a community where we all working for the same goal.
And you're doing amazing work because you're preparing the future of New York City. And as I can relate with you, I have 4 children. And I know when you invest in early childhood, you invest for the future. It's a game changer when you do that. And statistic has been proven that we need early childhood. And I want to say thank you. Thank you to you for the work you're doing. And as a mom, I know how difficult. If you can share briefly the colleagues, the friends that you have that are having the struggle to know that my child, I need to go to work and I don't have no place to put that child. You have a story.
On top of the fact that it does cost an average of $24,000 a year to send my son to school. Before I had Nuestros Niños, when I was employed, I was paying about $25,000 a year to have my child be taken care of, and that was still considered affordable. And in the 4 months that my son has been at Nuestros Niños, he's picked up 2 languages, he's formed sentences, he's only 2 years old. Like, people see him and they're so impressed by him because he's curious, he's active, and all of that comes from Nuestros Niños. Like, he's able to have a conversation with older family members in his family because they only speak Spanish. He's able to communicate with them. He translated something for me the other day, and he's a 2-year-old. So, and I am also a product of these programs. I went to a Head Start, and I went on to become a functional member of society. And I'm still best friends with a person that I met at 2 years old at my Head Start program. I'm now 37 years old. This is how important these programs are to the community. It's not just about education, it's also about building a community. It's also about building a support system. It's also about having friends and learning something that you wouldn't be learning at home.
So thank you.
Yes,
Thank
and
you for sharing.
I also want to mention that also for my mental health, it's very important for my son and I to have space and for me to feel supported. I already don't feel supported by the city. I already don't feel supported by my job. I don't have enough support from my family just because they also have to work. So if I didn't have Nuestros Niños, I don't know where I would be right now. But I know for sure that my relationship with my son would probably be strained.
The good things, we have 34 women, and we have educators that have the life experience, so we're gonna do whatever we can to push and making sure that we
And the wonderful 80 staff members at Nuestros Niños who are also extremely dedicated to the organization, to the school, and to the families of the school.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Just another reminder, thank you for that. And anyone who knows, I've always said this, if your foundation is strong, your top are gonna be strong. And we saw the reading scores. So by the time they leave you, they take that test, they will be strong. So continue to make investments, but this council, 31 women were committed to early childhood.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for your testimony.
Thank you. We will now turn to the administration. I will now administer the oath. In accordance with the rules of the council, I will administer the affirmation to the witnesses from the mayoral administration. I will call on each of you individually for a response. Please raise your right hand. Do you affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth before this committee, and to respond honestly to council member questions? Deputy Chancellor Simone Hawkins.
I do. Was that on? I do.
Cora Liu. I do. And then Daniel Hildreth, if you could raise your right hand. Can you? I do. John Hammer. Thank you. You may begin your testimony.
Good morning. Good morning, Chair Joseph and members of the City Council Committee on Education. My name is Simone Hawkins. I serve as Deputy Chancellor for the Early Childhood Education Division at New York City Public Schools. I am joined today by my colleague from the School Construction Authority and others from New York City Public Schools. Thank you for the opportunity to be here and for your continued partnership in ensuring that all New York City's children have access to high-quality early childhood education they need and deserve. Like previously mentioned, a child's earliest experiences are foundational to their lifelong outcomes. Research has consistently shown that the way a child is nurtured in their earliest years impacts whether they will successfully complete high school or struggle throughout their school years. I do know this firsthand, because the nurturing and love I received in my early years in East New York, Brooklyn, set me on the path to where I am today. As a lifelong New Yorker, I've experienced this system from multiple perspectives. As a student in our city's public schools, as a provider overseeing 14 childcare programs, and as a parent enrolling my daughter in an early childhood center. These experiences are directly tied to why I sit before you today as Deputy Chancellor. New York City is the largest and most diverse city in the country, which is reflected in the families we serve. The early childhood system we manage must have the versatility to meet the wide-ranging needs of communities, from the South Shore of Staten Island to Wakefield in the Bronx, from the Upper West Side to Brownsville. Our work must be tailored to the distinctive characteristics of different neighborhoods, establishing what communities truly need, and ensuring that we are delivering on those priorities as effectively as possible. We at New York City Public Schools have the capacity to serve approximately 140,000 children in early childhood with a commitment to ensure that every single one of those children is placed in the best possible learning environment. Today, more families are accepting more families are accepting offers than ever, growing from 9,500 offers in 2019 to over 43,000 offers in 2024. Record growth of 350% over 5 years. Huge thanks to the joint efforts of Mayor Adams' administration and the council, our investments in early childhood are bearing fruit. As outlined in the 10-point plan with support from the council's $5 million investment in outreach efforts, we are this month engaging families and communities through enrollment sprints in every borough. In addition, we are actively working to open almost 300 more special education seats over and above the 456 seats we opened at the beginning of the school year. Moreover, we have established and convened the Child Care Advisory Group and convened bi-weekly meetings with the administration and City Council to ensure continued dialogue. I'd like to thank the Speaker, Chair Joseph, and Councilmember Gutierrez for your continued support in this regard. We cannot achieve these accomplishments without your collaboration, and we firmly believe we are well positioned to do so much more for our youngest learners and families. While we are making advances to improve services to our communities, it is important to recognize the limitations of our current system and the challenges we face. When I stepped into this role in August, it was clear that the system needed to evolve to better meet current needs and remain adaptable for the future. Your conversations with constituents, as well as some of your own personal experiences to find an early care and education seat, have laid bare that reality. Our current capacity challenge is one of the clearest examples. Across our early childhood system, 30,000 seats currently sit vacant, even as some neighborhoods struggle with wait lists because demand exceeds available seats. This is a legacy of the system's rapid expansion, fueled by temporary stimulus dollars that are no longer available. In addition to inflexible contracts that leave us with a configuration that does not align with where families live, work, and seek care. This challenge is further compounded by the properties we manage, many of which were transitioned to us from the Administration for Children's Services, also known as ACS, when early childhood education was consolidated, specifically the contracted care system under New York City Public Schools, during expansion efforts. And the result? An oversaturation of seats and properties in some neighborhoods, leading to unhealthy competition, inefficient use of resources, and millions of dollars in misuse annually. Many of these properties remained underutilized or even vacant, yet they require considerable city tax levy funding to maintain. Some have long-term leases up to 20 years with no provisions for early termination, meaning the city continues to make rent payments and carries the implicit costs of sustaining them. Adding to those challenges, our contract mechanisms do not support or incentivize optimizing seat placements. While there are necessary fixed costs in operating early childhood programs, we currently subsidize too many under-enrolled programs. Whether a program serves one child or 3/4 of its full capacity, current contract terms provide for it to draw down on 75% of its contract value. This is not a sustainable or equitable way to manage public dollars or ensure that children and families receive the highest quality care possible. I want to be very clear. We are committed to serving as responsible stewards of this system, and that means making difficult but necessary decisions. While our recent decisions regarding 5 leased properties were difficult, and we are happy to work with the providers, landlords, and community members to come to a resolution for the next school year to sustain these contracts, even greater challenges lie ahead. We do not yet know what federal policy shifts or funding reductions may come from the federal level for programs like Head Start and other federal early childhood education initiatives. We want to ensure that our families do not lose access to the critical and formative programs needed to give them the bright start they deserve. Unlike these recent lease decisions, where no children face losing access to care due to available capacity in the community, potential loss of federal funding would require us to make even tougher choices in the future, including reducing seats in neighborhoods where no alternative options exist. If and when that moment comes, we will need the support of the council to mitigate the impact on families who rely on these programs. This underscores why we are actively working to realign resources where they are most needed, ensuring that families in every neighborhood have access to quality early childhood programs, while also reducing inefficiencies that undermine the long-term health of the system. To that effect, we have made significant strides in improving transparency in invoicing and payments, reducing the average invoice approval time to under 2 weeks, and are working across agencies, including with the Department of Health and Mental Hygiene, to streamline clearance background checks for program staff in partnership with the Mayor's Chief Efficiency Officer. I want to emphasize that we are committed to engaging this body in solutions that work best. We welcome collaboration with the council, our provider community, and families to ensure that any shifts in our system are done thoughtfully with children's best interests at the center of our decision making. I thank the council for the opportunity to speak today and look forward to your questions.
Thank you. So what does New York City Public School reason for potentially closing the five early child care sites?
So thank you for that question, Chair. So initially, I would like to kind of lay out the structure of the system. Under New York City Public Schools, we support about 4,000 sites across about 1,000 vendors. The majority of those sites are managed by our CBO partners. It is the exception, not the standard, for these providers to be occupying a city-owned or leased space. And so, as I mentioned in my testimony, we inherited about 86 sites, city leased and owned, from ACS during the transition. Around 60 of those sites are leased, and these 5 sites clearly are occupying a cohort of those 60. We also have about another 20 that we opened and acquired during the expansion under de Blasio. Some of those are vacant, and we are paying rent on them. Others are underutilized. And so it was very clear from the onset when I started in this role that it was my charge to stabilize and optimize the system. And so I looked at every corner of this current portfolio to see where we can make that possible with least harm to providers and families. And so our decision was really primarily built on looking at any leases that are expired already or set to expire by 2026. These 5 sites qualified for that based on their termination dates in their leases. Looking at those 3 factors and those considerations that were mentioned around community saturation, meaning are there other programs in the community that can absorb the capacity of these sites? The site utilization over 3 years, not just the current fiscal year, but also looking at 2 prior fiscal years based on their capacity and enrollment records, and the lease data, right? The terms, the length of that lease, and the cost, both current and potential. And so weighting those differently, each of the 5 sites have a very different and unique story. We made a decision not to renew the leases for the upcoming school year.
Do you have a list? Can you submit a list to the New York City Council of all the leases that's set to expire in the next 2 years?
Well, happy to.
Thank you. You do have several, matter of fact, I have one in my district that's sitting empty, which I had suggested should become a preschool special education site. There's a need for it. And one of the things that, and I complain, and I'm sure everybody else can echo this, New York City Public Schools sometimes are not great communicators. The site popped up in my district. I've been asking about that site forever. No one has said a word to me as to what's happening, but the community constantly reach out and say what's happening with this space. And no one at New York City Public Schools has ever asked me, and I made several suggestions, that there's a need for preschool special education. Currently, about 700 kids are still at home with no special education seats, legally mandated seats, and no one is reaching out. So maybe off the record, we will recircle and have that conversation. And I've had reached out to New York City Public Schools to see if that site can become a preschool special education. The need is there. And again, whatever you guys are calling it, process claims, Carter cases, will continue to balloon because we have never, ever provided legally mandated seats for our New York City students. So as you heard earlier, several sites have claimed there was little or no communication, no warning about the potential issues that would lead to their closures. In particular, there was resistance to the claim that these sites were under-enrolled, including Nosotros Niños, which claimed it had 80% enrollment with 96 students, while you claim they only had 4 students.
Sorry, did I miss your question, Chair? I'm
You
sorry.
sure did.
I did.
So
I'm sorry. May you please restate it?
Earlier, the providers said you only claimed that they had 4 students, while they had 96 students enrolled, and that was one of the driving factors in closing their sites.
Correct. And so I just want to address something you said previously. So you did raise the issue of the vacant site in your district, and I do recall responding to that diligently. And also addressing that, I think this issue has come up with a few other council members about vacant sites in their communities.
Yep.
And I have equally been responsive. And so I hope that has been demonstrated through and through, and I look forward to continuing the conversations about what we can do with the Flatbush site. And so we rely, like many of us, on our systems of record. And so Vendor Portal Pre-Kids is our system of record for our CBO partners. It is their responsibility and their requirement to enter enrollment records into the systems. It is the same responsibility for our public school, or district school rather, principals who are required to do so in ATS. And so we looked at our system. We saw that 4 kids were included and entered into the system. And right after our conversations in January started with these programs, the entering of the enrollment records increased dramatically. And so, again, I want to remind the council that although that claim has come up, we do rely on the records. It is the responsibility of the provider, but we also looked at prior enrollments from prior years. And so the decision was not reliant solely on FY25, but we looked at years prior, and it did not meet our standard of full enrollment, which is at 95%. And so we looked at that year over year for all 5 locations, and all but 1 consistently was significantly under 95%.
And when you see these things, is there a team that reaches out to the provider and say, hey, I'm not seeing your numbers, you're giving me this number, but that's not what I'm seeing in the system? Is there support provided for providers when when there's a discrepancy?
So we wouldn't know it's a discrepancy unless it was reported to us by a provider. Again, this is our system of record, so we rely on the provider to enter accurate data into the system in which we are looking. Again, we are managing over 3,000 sites and programs. And so in the case that we do not see enrollments at 95%, there are a host of supports provided to programs. And again, these are independent businesses, right? So we respect that things are happening in community. I think one thing we learned in conversation recently with many of the providers, and one of the things I raised in my testimony, is that they don't necessarily have the right seat configurations for the communities that they're serving today. We wouldn't know that. The needs assessment and the assessment of demand in community is done by the provider. I had to do that when I was serving across and supporting those 14 sites. They are steeped in community, something we keep hearing. And so if at any point they're seeing that maybe whatever they were awarded initially 5 years ago, a year ago, because all of the contracts are different on different terms, we do look to them, encourage them to reach out to us to have those conversations.
And how long, when you see the input, how long does it show up on your end?
Sorry. So if enrollment data is entered today, we usually give it about a 24-hour turnaround for us to see it live in our system on our end.
But Grand Settlement doesn't meet none of the criterias that you talked about, so why are they on the chopping block?
So Grand Street did have enrollment below the 95%, 2 years ago, and at the point in time in which we pulled the data for FY25, they were also below. But again, as I mentioned, each of the 3 considerations were weighted differently. That particular lease issue is the one that really elevated them for consideration for non-renewal. That lease has been expired since 2019. The projected increases for that lease were exorbitant. And we wanted to ensure that we can negotiate something that was sustainable for the city in the long term.
And you are in negotiations with the landlords currently?
We have been in conversation with the landlords and were able to convince the landlord to allow the program to stay until the end of school year 25 to 26, while continues working with our partners at Early Childhood to figure out the next steps.
And I'm speaking to the mic because we couldn't hear you. So how many staffs would have been laid off at each of these sites if they were closed, and how many students would have been impacted?
Give me 1 second, Chair. I'm sorry, I do have that data for you. So we have about, it's my understanding we have about 200 students who would have been impacted across these sites. Again, the capacity is almost 500. They have been below capacity across all 5 of the sites. And many of the children that are currently enrolled, about half of the currently enrolled population, are transitioning to kindergarten. And so they wouldn't have been impacted by the non-renewal of these leases.
So can you give them to me per site, all my children?
Yeah, sure. Give me 1 second if you don't mind. I'm so sorry. We have a very long document here. Okay, so as for the, all my children, they would have 9 toddlers, 10 3K children. I'm sorry, 18 3K children, for a total of 27. And I'll go back to staff next.
And young minds?
That would be 8 toddlers and 19 3K children, for a total of 27.
Friends?
13 3K children.
Grand Street?
27 3K children, excuse me.
Nosotros Niños has been operating since 1973.
Sorry, Chair, I didn't give you the numbers for New
Oh,
Orleans.
Nosotros Niños, yes.
19 toddlers and 43K, for a total of 59.
Can you repeat that?
19 toddlers and 43K, for a total of 59.
And the staff that would have been laid off?
And the staff, you are quicker than I am. I'm sorry. If I can get back to you on that one, because I am not finding that data, but I do know I have it, so apologies for that.
Earlier, Nosotros Niños talked about they've been operating since 1973, serve a large Latinx student population inclusive setting. If this center closes after contract expiration June 2026, would New York City Public School be able to enroll these students in comparable programs that speak their culture through language and food?
Yeah, and so one thing I want to mention is some of these contracts actually are renewed on an annual basis. And others are on the 5-year track for the Birth to 5. And so those contracts are set to expire in June 2026. If not for an extension, we would need to resolicit through an open and fair competitive process, not just those seats, but also these sites. And so it's important to know that around planning for the sustainability of the system. And so in regards to cultural relevancy and responsiveness and community, you know, one thing we did mention to Nuestros Niños specifically, they are more than just a site, they are community. And they actually have 2 more sites within that community that are walking distance and have open seats available to communities if they wanted to serve them.
They also have bilingual programs?
At the other 2 sites?
Yes.
That I can't speak to. I would have to verify if they're certified bilingual.
Yeah, because I want to target that particular niche of students. I'm going to turn it over quickly to Councilmember Hudson.
Thank you so much, Chair. I have several questions, so I'm going to try to stay within my 5 minutes here. But we've heard from the administration at Fort Greene Council that they're still awaiting over $500,000 in reimbursements from child care services rendered in 2020. What has caused this 5-year delay in processing this reimbursement?
Am I still on mute? Okay, this document is fun, y'all. Okay. Thank you for that question. And so for Fort Greene Council, we have been working with that provider for quite some time around their FY25 payments. And so just a little context, again, and sorry if I'm giving too much background, but it's important to understand process. So if a provider does not have a registered contract, although we can work with them to pre-approve their budget, they cannot begin to invoice us because we need a finally approved budget against a registered contract. So that does cause some delay. And so in the instances where we don't have a registered contract, again, we have to work closely with the provider around potentially getting a bridge loan, which is no interest to them, and then again, working with them to get a pre-approved budget. When their contract is registered, they can finally submit a finally approved budget, begin invoicing us. And so we've been working with the provider for quite some time on budget revisions. And so the budget was approved on January 7th, finally. And then the vendor submitted July through November invoices between that time and January 28th, also some in February, and then payments were processed in late January. So I'm not aware of any—
Sorry, you said the payments were processed in late January?
Yes, yes,
Okay.
council member. They were processed between January 28th, 2025, as they started submitting them on a rolling basis. The last invoice submitted for FY24 was for the June service month. That service month requires a little bit more of an in-depth submission because it requires a little bit more reporting. And so we received, that was submitted on September 20th, 2024, and we remitted payment October 11th, 2024. And so if there's any outstanding payments, I'm happy to reach out, but to our records, we don't have any additional at this time.
Okay, and then what would cause a contract to not be registered?
A host of things. And so that is a process that's done internally across several divisions within the agency, and also externally. We have the support of the Controller's Office, who also assists in that process. And so sometimes it can be a background check that we find on the provider or vendor that can cause some delays. We also look to the provider to provide us with some information like a budget. It's different from their operating budget. It's their contract budget that needs to go with the registration packet. And so in some instances, that can take a little bit of time as we negotiate that. So there are different inputs that can cause delays with contract registration.
Okay, do you have a plan for preventing similar payment delays for providers from happening in the future?
Yes, I have lots of hopes and dreams.
Whether for registered contracts or not?
Yeah, and so one of the things we're doing with the help of the administration as well is really trying to streamline the process for contract registrations. That is something we do need to improve on holistically, and I think that's something we've acknowledged openly. When we do have a registered contract, we are working internally to build staff capacity within my division. We want to ensure that we don't have as high caseloads for our operation analysts, so they can not only provide more direct customer service, but they can also process any requests more quickly. And then systems. I think one of the pain points that have come up, and I'll be, again, the first to admit, some of our systems are they run parallel to one another, which requires our providers to do a lot more data entry than we would like, and also it limits our ability to do reporting. And so right now we're looking on releasing a new information management system. We hope that'll help with more proactive communication for providers, but will also allow us to see things on the back end more quickly.
Okay, thanks. And I'm going to, Chair, I just have a couple more questions. I'm running out of time here. But New York City public school officials have told many of our early childhood education sites that were slated to be eliminated but then granted temporary one-year extensions that they must achieve a 95% enrollment over the next year. Can you share how many DOE-funded early childhood education sites are at 95% capacity or greater?
Can I get back to you on that one, Councilmember? I can definitely provide that.
Okay, and then when you get us that, can you also share for those that are not at 95%, are they also at risk for closure ahead of or following the termination of their 5-year contract? That would be helpful to know.
We'll get back to you, but one thing I want to say about that last question, I think one of our learnings from this experience is the very thing that the chair mentioned around communication. And so if we are to get there again, which I do not anticipate happening anytime soon, we will be sure to communicate that as proactively as possible.
Okay, thank you. And then you've also told the 5 nearly terminated sites, Chair, may I continue? Thank you. That you would assist them in establishing a recruitment plan, yet many of these providers do not have the capacity or expertise to compile these plans, especially given hundreds of thousands of dollars in unpaid reimbursements from the city that restricts recruitment and hiring operations. Other than suggesting the inclusion of components, how are you working with these providers to make these plans, and what tangible resources is DOE providing?
Yeah, so I do think many of these providers, including Fort Greene Council, I remember them during my time at the council under Tish James, they have been in community for a really long time. And so if there's anyone who could put boots on the ground and recruit families, I do think it's definitely those veterans who have been doing this work. They know where to look for children, they know where to connect with families, and many of them throughout this time have said very clearly that the community needs them, and they have seats that families want. And so in addition to helping them draft that based on their expertise and knowledge, we are going to supplement that with our expertise and knowledge and say, these are some of the approaches and strategies that we've done and supported providers with across community. And in our conversations too, some of our providers have shared that they just don't have the seats that meet community need. And so where we can reconfigure seats, we will do that so they can maximize enrollment as much as possible.
Thank you.
You're
Thank
welcome.
you, Chair.
Thank you, Councilmember Hudson. Yeah. So in your testimony, you stated that New York ECE system has a capacity to serve about 140,000 kids. There are 30,000 vacancies currently in the system. Can you provide a breakdown on capacity, enrollment, and vacancies by each seat type, age group, including pre-K, 3K, infant, and toddler?
Yes, we can provide that to the council.
You'll provide it to the council, you don't have it. Are there any programs not included in the 140,000 capacity number, such as Promise NYC or Head Start?
Promise NYC is not within the New York City Public Schools portfolio, and Head Start is included in that 140,000 capacity.
You mentioned that the providers did not meet your threshold 95%, just to piggy off of Councilmember Hudson. Having a full enrollment, but as you also testify, there are 30,000 vacancies in the system. This would imply that many programs are not meeting the full enrollment standard. Can you clarify what New York City Public Schools' position on what should happen with sites that are not full enrollment? That's to piggyback off of Councilmember Hudson's question.
Yeah, so I would encourage that if folks are under-enrolled significantly or even slightly, they know why the most and the best. And so if they know it's because their current seat configurations are not meeting the needs of families in their communities, I encourage them to reach out to us so we can have some real honest conversations about what we can do to support a modification of their slots. Now, I want to say this very clearly. It is not a blanket yes in which we can do that. We have to follow procurement rules. We have to look at what they applied for when they applied originally, and then we have to look at what the existing saturation levels are in community. If we know that there's already underutilization in school day, school year seats for 4-year-olds, we're not going to add more school day, school year seats for 4-year-olds in that community. It's not helping the other providers, and it won't help them. And so we really encourage them to reach out. But again, I want to remind the council that the motivations behind this was not strictly around enrollment levels, which we looked at for 3 years. It was around the lease termination dates. And so providers who have city lease properties that might be approaching termination, we will be reaching out to have conversations.
Not right before. See, when we talked about communication,
Correct.
that should be happening, ongoing, alerting them. Since reversing your decisioning and opening the website to allow families to apply, what can you tell us about what you've seen? Have you engaged every tool on your disposal to ensure that these centers aren't losing the chance for filled seats since they're not getting an extension?
Yes. And so in addition to opening up the portal as quickly as possible, we actually, my team specifically, called every enrolled family to have conversations and let them know that the schools were now accessible in the system. Walk them through the 3K and pre-K application process through my schools. And those parents who are matriculating to kindergarten in the fall, sometimes they stay with our EDY providers over the summer. And so letting them know that they should reach out to the provider to kind of talk through that process. And then with the thanks to my colleagues in the Office of Student Enrollment, they also did a mass blast to all of the My Schools registrants within the respective districts, letting them know that the schools are accessible in the system. And this week, after we finalize the translations, we'll be sending out a letter to families, letting them know as well.
Okay.
I'm sorry, Chair. I failed to note that we also invited the providers to the enrollment fairs that are open in each of the boroughs. Brooklyn occurred last Saturday at the Brooklyn Children's Museum. I was personally there and saw many of our Brooklyn-based providers there, specifically those who are involved in this situation. And so that is another option extended to them.
Through the enrollment and outreach program. How many remaining private sites will New York City Public Schools be assessing in the out years? And what have you learned from this year's proposal to improve communication, since advocates emphasize the lack of communication?
Do you want to speak to the number of terminations, and I'll speak to the next one?
Sure, we do have, as Deputy Chancellor Hawkins mentioned, when we inherited about 86 ACS sites, about 60 of them were lease sites. We have caught up and extended leases for all of them. So we have caught up. We are now working to plan ahead, not just 6 months, but maybe with a longer time frame, so that we can plan better and communicate sooner. Those 60 sites will all have future expiration date, and some of them going out to 2040.
Do you have a number of how many sites that have upcoming expiring leases in the 2 years? Off the top of your head, do you know how many sites?
I think we have about 6, 3 of which are out of the 5 sites we're talking about today.
About 6 sites?
Yeah.
Okay. Can SCA share the timeline of conversation with landlords? They say it starts 6 months before, but we still don't know if they spoke to them on time, 2 times, or even got a response. What about the timelines for Nosotros Niños specifically?
So out of the 5, 1 site does not expire until 2028, so we haven't really reached out to the landlords. 3 other sites have expiration date outside of the 6 months window, so we haven't reached out to the landlords until recently, when we were trying to make sure they can give us guarantee to stay until the end of 2025 and 26 school year. The only site which we have been having ongoing conversation, negotiation with, is Grand Street. Mm-hmm. The lease expired a couple years ago. We have been in conversation with the landlord for the past 3-4 years. There are times the landlord was not as responsive, and in conversations, the landlord has asked for a large amount of increase. So we were going through back and forth to try to get to a great amount, and that's in between still happening. So recently, we're able to convince him to allow us to stay until the end of the school year.
So the conversations are starting 6 months before the lease is expired?
Typically.
Not 3 months or a month before, and surprising providers.
Correct.
Earlier, DC Hawkins, you talked about having these type of seats. How easy, is it easy to modify these contracts?
No, not
How long does it
necessarily.
take? In case I have a contract and I say, you know what, I can't serve this population, what can I do with the contract, and how long can I turn that around?
Yeah. So it depends. And so, for instance, some of just kind of focusing on the 5, some of them are on old early learn contracts, and again, mentioning that those are renewed on an annual basis. Others, we competed for the Birth to 5 contract and are on those and on the 5-year track. And so, really dependent upon the terms and conditions in each of those contracts, we are limited with how and which seats we can provide at those sites. Specifically with city lease sites, we are required to provide an EDY option. And so fully eradicating that in those sites is not an option. And as we know, our communities are changing, and many
Correct.
families may want school day, school year. That's not an option under the current contract. Also, we have folks who did apply but did not get awarded. And so, in the sake of equity and a fair procurement process, if we said as a result we didn't extend an award to a certain provider because there's either no need or fund availability, turn around and provide that to an existing contractor, we're opening up the city to potential liability. And so when these requests come in, we have to look at it one by one to assess where they were in the kind of award pipeline, what they have currently, and then what the community might need based on our data. It can take, to answer your question, depending on the details of that, it can take from a few weeks to maybe a few months to make a decision.
Thank you. Councilmember Stevens?
Hello, good afternoon. Oh, good morning. So I just have a couple of questions, and one, I wanted to also make a statement. I know Chair Joseph talked about there being an empty site in her district. I also have an empty site that DOE's been paying for and has been empty for a number of years, and we've reached out. There's been people who actually said that they would love to turn into a 3K center and have not been getting any response. So definitely want to make sure that we are optimizing the space. And then another thing I wanted to just kind of highlight, because I know the talk has also been that, we need to be looking at the seats and oversaturation. Obviously, we want to make sure districts are not oversaturated, but I also want to be careful about when we're talking about seats in certain districts, because just because they're not full doesn't mean that it's oversaturated. We have not been doing a good job as recruitment, and I know that's been a plan that's been in the works for the last year to ramp up recruitment and what that looks like and to support some of these nonprofits. But I think sometimes when we're saying, certain seats aren't full and things like that, I want to make clear that certain districts might have more seats but less interaction because we're not doing the work, and not saying we're going to remove them. But I wanted to start here because one of my pet peeves is that I often feel like we have city agencies doing similar work and they kind of don't talk. ACS has a voucher program that is working, and so have we done any evaluation to see where those vouchers are being used, and is that having any impact on 3K? Because I feel like this is a question that no one has been talking about and really not really been comparing. And when we're talking about fixing the system, we got to start looking from within. So has any of that work been done to be working with ACS to see where their vouchers are being used at and where those communities at, and then looking at the overlap with 3K?
I appreciate that question very much. And so I agree around that coherence and coordination across agencies. I think we've made great progress and strides in talking to one another. We have a ways to go, for sure. And so I work very closely, as well as my team, with ACS, also with HRA. We are all supporting what we kind of call the child care eligibility system, maybe through contracted care or vouchers. And we are having those conversations, Councilmember. We have to do, I think, a bit of work on data sharing.
So if you guys are having the conversation, do we have any data that can look at where these things are overlapping? And don't worry, I'm not just asking this from you. I'm also been asking this on our side as well, because we've been talking about 3K for the last 3 years. And I'm sick of talking at it, and I would like us to be talking about how do we fix the solution. Because if we have a program where it seems to be working a lot better and more equitable, then how do we figure out to use those best practices, and also seeing how, is that also affecting this program? Because we keep talking about expanding and putting more money into it, but we're not talking about fixing it. And I know there's also a whole other list of things that we never talk about in these hearings, as far as the DOH and how that is a huge part of the system that no one ever talks about how that needs to be fixed, around getting these sites up and running. And even moving sites is even hard because they also have to get certified and get SCR clearances, not only for the space but for the teachers. And last time we did the DOH hearing, only 75 inspectors do that for across the city. And so those things are things that we also have to talk about that's never part of the conversation. And so I really want to make sure that we're bringing that to the forefront too. How are we also working with some of these other agencies that affect the system so much that hinders the expansion from happening? Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so we're working to improve our coordination across all agencies. I agree that it's going to take all of us to improve this system. There's not a one-stop solution to fix this. We have to look at our current contracts. To your point, we have to look at where parents are choosing to go. And that changes year over year, right? I know personally that some parents prefer a voucher because they feel safer having their infant with a family member, for instance. But as we get into our pre-K years, they want to get their foot into that district school, and so they're potentially eyeing that district school or a charter school, right? And so I think as we are engaging across the agencies, we have to also center parent needs and choices. And I think we are looking into ways to do that more effectively. That should guide any decisions we make as we reimagine what the system should and will look like. And so we have to talk about resource constraints, the best way to blend and braid funding so we can maximize those supports. We have to look at the regulations, as you mentioned, from our health department partners, but also those from the New York State Office of Children and Family Services, who serve as the primary and sole regulator of our family child care space. And so coordination must be improved. We are having those conversations. I will not sit here and overpromise and underdeliver that we have data ready and available that does that kind of deep analytical assessment.
So I would just advise, and here's the thing, right? I have oversight of ACS. I've also been pushing their side. That is something that needs to happen.
I agree.
Like you know, data for me is important, and this is DOE. You're always talking about data, right? And so if we don't have the data to actually look at the information and take a deep dive to think about how to move forward, I think that is one of the first things we should be doing. That should have been one of the first things that was done when the expansion happened. But I can't, blame people. I wasn't here. Whatever. You weren't here, whatever. But that should have been part of the conversation around this expansion. And for the last 3 years, that's something that has not been brought to the forefront or have not even been talked about. And I think that is at a point where we actually need to step back and do some real deep diving around evaluating of all the programs that we have. Like you said, ACS, HRA, all of these other programs, and how that is also affecting the system, because it's not part of the conversation. And I think it's affecting where it is and whether we should expand, because on the other side, ACS has been expanding their program and voucher system for the last 3 years. At the same time, 3K has been expanding, but no one is kind of bringing that sort of forefront. And so I just wanted to make sure that we start pushing the conversation in a way of more solutions around what is in the system, because a lot of it keeps falling under DOE, but I think that there's some other outlining factors, and also thinking about the other piece around even DOH, being a person and a provider who worked in the system, understanding that sometimes classrooms are closed for the littlest thing, and so your enrollment is affected often because a teacher might be out, so now people who are certified. So that's another thing. And my last question, sorry, Chair, Highbridge Advisory Council, who was in my district, I know they were closed, not because of losing the contract. They were closed because of some administrative issues on the provider side. Do you have any updates around the last bit? I know last time we spoke, you spoke a little bit about how you were back paying some of the staff on one end, but we're still trying to figure out, was that ever resolved? Because I never got a follow-up.
Yeah, we are not able to provide back pay to the actual independent family child care providers. We are not in contract with them directly. We weren't in contract with Highbridge through their network contract, and payment was already remitted to Highbridge for those providers. However, we worked really closely with the UFT and others, I personally with my team and ACS. We are really trying to improve our coordination, met with the providers, hosted a meeting, and really extended them some options. And so those who wanted to explore the voucher route, ACS was able to transition them into that, and in some instances backdate the kids to a certain date so they can get payment. And then we were able to reaffiliate those with who were interested with a new network. And so we worked really closely. I really want to give a shout out to our UFT partners for helping to convene that conversation so that they can get paid moving forward.
Well, thank you for that update, and I would have loved to have the update not here, and I'm gonna have to act on the record, so please make sure that you're kind of connecting with us. But then the last thing I was gonna say, have you guys done anything to ensure that something like that wouldn't be able to happen again? Because I think that that's just as important of how we use these things as learning tools, and so have you guys implemented anything to ensure this doesn't happen again? And just for those who don't know, there was a provider who did not submit payment to their staff, and they went out of business, and so there was staff who were not paid for months. And so they've been working really hard to figure out how to pay them.
It was an awful situation. So this actually occurred at the start of me joining in my role, and we immediately started to evaluate what we can do to mitigate these. And so for one, we have a very detailed invoicing process, but we don't want to overexert or ask for more data and backup. We do ask for payroll information usually at least twice a year, because we don't want to be document heavy and to contribute to any delays in payments. And then also obviously just having a different pulse and check-in with our providers to make sure that they are being diligent in their expectations of the contract. Lastly, creating more spaces to connect with the family child care providers directly outside of the network is something we are considering. Clearly our contract is with the network, We want to respect that relationship, but this situation clearly demonstrated a need for us to connect directly with the family child care providers. And if we create that space, we are hopeful that things will come up that we won't normally see in the system. And so we're hoping to implement some of those strategies in the future. It was very, very awful, and I am so sorry that happened. Thank you.
Councilmember Hudson.
Thank you so much. And sorry, I want to revisit my first question because I think the numbers you provided were for 2024, not 2020.
For the invoices, Councilmember?
Yes, for Fort Greene Council. So they're still awaiting over $500,000 in reimbursements from child care services rendered in 2020.
2020.
Yeah, and that's what I'm trying to get to the bottom of. They have told my team that there were initial email correspondences with promises made, invoice amount with submission history and reimbursement approval from DOE in the mayor's portal. There was a submission to the mayor's office requesting help with the situation in December 2024, and there's been subsequent back and forth correspondences within the invoices showing a log between Fort Greene Council and the DOE representative.
Oh, my team is saying that was related to the Family Child Care Network. It's a different contract, and that at that time was part of a different system. It was HHS Accelerator. Now we're in Passport. And so my team has been working diligently with them. As you know, we're in FY25. And so we have to do a lot more work to go as far back as 2020, especially when the systems are different. But we have been in conversation with them about that. That is
it the change in systems that caused the non-payment?
I have to look into the details of what caused the non-payment going back to 2020. That I don't have details on for you, but I can definitely round back. But we are working with them to get them payment.
Okay, so what exactly does working with them to get payment mean, though?
Yeah, we've been in continued contact with them, letting them know what we have to do. We have to reach out to MOX. We have to reach out to other agencies to support. Since the information was submitted in the system, we no longer have access to.
Right.
And so we have to somehow, in some way, be able to pull out that information so we can remit payment in a totally different system.
So it's an administrative, operational type of issue. Do you know if there are other centers that are facing similar challenges where money got backed up from the previous platform you used?
I don't want to misspeak. No, not in this particular situation, and only for our family child care networks are they in a different system from our CBOs. So I'm personally not aware of other programs in this situation.
Okay. They've continued to incur expenses for child care services, and today over $1.2 million remains unpaid, which has obviously limited cash flow and negatively affected the overall condition and growth of this daycare center. So I would love to work directly with you and your teams
Absolutely.
to figure out the fastest way to get this paid
Absolutely.
from 2020.
Absolutely. I will work with my team on this issue to make sure we are definitely dotting every I and crossing every T.
Okay, great.
And so I would love to connect with you about that site and any other sites in your district.
Thank you.
The same question, how many providers are still stuck in that old system? How many are still stuck there, do you know?
I do not know.
Can you get that information to us, and how much is owed to those providers, right? This is 2020, none of us were here. This is wild.
I agree.
This is wild.
And so again, we will investigate that, but also every situation is different.
We understand
right?
that.
And so it's my understanding, this is not to point the finger. We need to do better at communicating and working with providers so they can do what they need to do in the back office. But in some cases, we also do not get information so we can do the part that we need to do to move the process forward. And so again, having improved systems, having more staff, we need to improve customer service. We need to be able to proactively connect with programs and say, hey, we didn't get that invoice from about 2 months ago, what's going on? And so I will be also, my experience as a provider, also have an operations background. That is not the ministry of everyone doing this work. Some of them come in wanting to take care of children.
And that's it.
And we are clear about that. But there is a huge administrative part to this work. And so as we together co-create what the future of this system will look like, I really do invite you to have any suggestions around how we could support providers in the long term who are struggling with the admin part of the work, because it's causing some tension, and I do want to figure out a holistic solution to this problem.
And how many vacancies do you have?
For our operation analysts, one second, Chair. I do have that data. Current vacancies right now is 15. We have vacancies of 12 analysts. Those are our operations analysts. They are kind of the first level of approval and support for our providers, and 3 supervisors who's also support with the approval chain and process.
When will you be filling up those positions?
We are working diligently. They're posted, they're out. We're trying to work with folks both through the civil service process. In some cases, we have to pull folks from lists. So we're going through that process now. So we're moving as quickly as possible.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to recognize Councilmember Shaker and pass it on to Councilmember Lee.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. So I have a lot of questions about the procurement contracting process, and I say this with, having run nonprofit organizations for 15 years in New York City and having to deal with DFTA, DOHMH, DYCD, and a lot of the other agencies. And I have to say, I'm getting a little heated, not at you guys personally, but because it's almost bringing, I always joke around saying I'm a recovering, nonprofit executive, because it's a lot. And I just want to say to the nonprofit providers that are in the room, I hear you and I feel your frustration, because having to deal with all of these contracts and each agency has its own rules, it's very frustrating. And so I regret that I wore a turtleneck, because I'm getting a little hot right now, but I'm like, woo, yeah. But, I just wanted to go into a little bit, and I'm just gonna, not in any particular order, but shoot out some of my questions. So if I'm understanding correctly, you guys are not on the Passport system, because I know it went from Vendex to HHS and now it's Passport, and then you guys are on a separate system?
We are in Passport for our Family Child Care Network contracts, and then we are in Vendor Portal for the other contracted programs.
Okay, so for the other, wait, I'm sorry, what was it?
Vendor Portal.
Vendor Portal, okay. So how is that linked to Passport? So if I'm a provider that's doing multiple contracts and programs, how am I able to see transparently where things are at in terms of payments, where the delays are?
So those systems are not linked. And so if I may, Ingrid, use you as an example, if you don't mind. Nuestros Niños has both a CBO contract, a center-based contract, which is processed through Vendor Portal. So they would go through there to assess their enrollments, their invoices, their attendance through that system for that specific program. For their Family Child Care Network contracts, they would go through Passport to assess those. Those systems do not speak to one another. They are separate, and they manage different contracts.
Right, so how do we get them to speak to each other?
That is not our intention, right? And so we do not, in New York City Public Schools, manage Passport. That is managed by a separate agency. Our hope is to have all of our contracts in one centralized system, and so we're working to develop that now.
For DOE, or you mean DOE or the city entirely?
Just for New York City Public Schools Division of Early Childhood Education.
What was the rationale for separating out?
That I cannot answer. I mean, that's how it's been organized for many, many years, I think even when I was a provider. So I can't speak to why that happened.
Okay, and the reason why I bring this up is because I understand that for each of these portals and systems and contracts, I have to say, as someone who's running an organization with multiple contracts, it gets very, very cumbersome with the paperwork and all of the different things. And so I know you're trying to make it as less cumbersome as possible, but especially with different systems and different contracts and multiple contracts, it adds up and it is a lot. I cannot tell you how much time I spent just doing paperwork alone, applying for these contracts and keeping track of every single one. And that's everything from like the $5,000 to $10,000 to like the $100,000, $200,000 plus contract levels. And so in terms of your contracts that you have through DOE, what's the percentage of advance that you give them?
So it varies. And so I believe, I don't want to misspeak, I believe we give 35% for our school day, school year seats, and then 25% for our EDY.
Okay, is there any room to increase those amounts? Because I know other agencies have moved to do that as well.
So we have done that in the past intermittently. I remember that from personal experience. We would have to consider the recoupment schedule associated with that, and we have seen by increasing the advance, it has led to providers owing the city money because they weren't, for one, incentivized to submit invoices, nor were we able to recollect on the advance. And so it also interfered with their cash flow.
But in the advance, can't you also require that certain things be done by a timeline? So in other words, with that, there should be some more outcomes and guidelines, perhaps, to alleviate that issue? Because I almost feel like it's a catch-22. Because in sometimes the situations is that because they don't have the advance, they cannot do the recruitment. So I think it can go both ways.
So I'm open to having the conversation. I think there's been some situations in the past that did not yield really good outcomes for the city when we've increased the advance. I think we actually went as high as 40%, if I'm remembering correctly.
Okay.
And it really put a lot of the programs in a difficult spot. And so I'm happy to explore that further with you and others to really see what's feasible or what's not.
Okay. And to the chair's point, as well as what Councilmember Stevens was saying, because just going through your testimony, I know that you outline a lot of the issues, like need to evolve, the system needs to evolve to better meet current needs, inflexible contracts, the rejiggering of seats and, leading to unhealthy competition and inefficient use of resources. So when I read, I'm sorry, is it okay if I finish? So when I read all of these things, my question is we're looking to you all to guide us in terms of, like, so if you don't have the power to change the inflexible contracts, who does, right? And is there a way to reevaluate, even though we're in the middle of an RFP contracting process, is there a way to reevaluate or do white papers to do new RFPs with slightly different scopes, right? Because I know that with this program, like you're saying, if it's inflexible, what is that solution? How do we get to a possible new RFP that we do through white papers, through getting feedback, and then administer that?
Yeah, that's the solution, right? I think, we have all signed an agreement or contract, and we are all bound by the parameters of those agreements. We want to respect that agreement too. And so where we can be nimble, we want to be nimble, but we are also very much restricted by what can and can't happen, right? This was a fair solicitation. We want to respect people who applied with the understanding these were the terms. And so as we go into understanding where we can be as flexible as possible, we are exploring those, council member,
Okay.
And extending those opportunities to our providers. But really where we have the most opportunity is as we reimagine the future. And we are engaging in conversation with providers and even families around what they envision that to be so we can co-create something together.
Okay. I mean, hopefully that can be done almost on parallel tracks. So
Absolutely.
in other words, we don't want this contract to end and then for us to start that process after. So hopefully that's something. And then just really two quick questions is, for the federal dollars that are potentially going to be cut, what percentage of that is pass-through money to you guys, right? Because I know that even though the city has its money, a lot of that embedded is federal dollars. And so do you know the total amount or percentage that we're talking about here?
Yeah, so the pass-through is specifically our CCDBG funds. It's passed through from the feds, the states, through ACS to us, and it's about $6 million. Oh, I'm misspeaking. It is about $127 million.
Okay. That's a lot.
It is.
And what is the sort of plan to, in case that goes away, what is the alternative solution that we're thinking, or that you guys are thinking about?
So, there are a lot of priorities across the city. CCDBG doesn't only touch early childhood here in the city. And so as we all, really address these uncertain times and start to do some scenario planning, we're doing that in conjunction with the administration. We're doing that in conjunction with OMB. And so it's hard for us to plan without having details. But we are considering the possibilities where we can't absorb, where we can. But I can't really get into any specifics without having more details about what will be presented to us, unfortunately.
Yeah, we're all going to be in that one together, so thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councilmember Shaker.
Thank you so much, Chair, for hosting this important hearing. And the reason for it is because, as you're hearing, we're all, and I'm especially and extremely concerned about this administration's approach to early childhood education. The comments that Mayor Adams has made versus the reality on the ground of the large demand for early childhood education. And I want to talk about one center in particular, but before doing that, just a couple of questions of the statistics to really highlight this disparity. And I know you all, with the charge you've been given, are doing the best that you all can, but are you aware that from 2023 from 2021 to 2024, there's been a 27% increase in the number of 3K applications? Were you aware of that?
I am aware that there has been a significant increase in 3K applications.
And are you also aware that in the first 4 months of 2025 versus the first 4 months of 2024, ACS reported an 82% increase in the average number of children using low-income child care vouchers? Were you aware of that jump?
I was not aware of that specific number, but I am aware that there was also an increase.
And are you also aware that while the mayor was saying that every child who wanted a 3K or a pre-K seat would get it, are you aware that between 2021 and 2024, the percentage of families who applied on time and received a 3K offer increased only by 2%, even though the number of applicants increased by 10,000?
I am aware of that.
And you're also aware that as of January 30th, 2025, I think you all testified that about 450 students were still awaiting early child education special education seats.
We are also aware of that.
And so when I see these numbers and we hear how much the demand for early childhood education is growing so rapidly, the need for special education and early childhood seats too, I am shocked at the way the mayor has really made it a point to cut from 3K to talk about how every child will get a seat, but the demand continues to rise so much. And I think you would agree that early childhood education is one of the best investments we could make, right? Not just for children and families, but also for the workforce too, right?
I agree.
And I see it as an incredibly important economic engine for our city. But again, there's a sharp disparity between this administration's approach to early childhood education, knowing its importance, and knowing what the data says about the demand. I want to focus in particular on
May I?
Sure.
And so I do appreciate those stats, and I think what you've demonstrated there is the exact thing we're trying to solve for. And so the mayor has been very clear in his commitment, and this is a commitment that must be supported at all levels of government. It is not only ours to own and bear at the local level. And so working closely with our federal government and state partners to get the resources to properly sustain this system, it is a very, very dynamic ecosystem that requires all of our support. And one thing around 3K growth, that is a need that has changed within the 5-year span of a contract that doesn't allow for that level of flexibility. And so although we see very clearly, and I think I articulated this in my opening remarks, that there is a need for 3K, I will go as far to say there is even a higher need for infant toddler care, which we are not meeting right now in the city. And we are unable to do so if we only focus on expanding.
Right.
Optimizing is a bi-directional process. We can only, within the confines of our resources and systems, increase in places that need the care, may it be 3K or otherwise, by really evaluating spaces that are underutilized to shift those resources. And we've been committed in doing so. And so as much as possible, we would like to move forward in that direction so we can meet the demands of community.
And we agree, and I know you agree on the importance of these investments, and it is a joint approach, but how this administration approaches that question, I think, really matters. And so one daycare site I want to focus on in particular is Nuestros Niños. Are you aware that Nuestros Niños faced a similar battle for its closure about maybe 6 or 7 years ago?
I'm aware that there was an open competitive process for the location in which it was awarded to another vendor, and because of the pandemic, they were not required to vacate the premise.
So I know about that because I was involved in that fight. Nuestros Niños was a client of mine. A lot of the parents that send their children to that daycare center were clients of mine who were doing that so they could go to work to pay their rent. I worked in that community for 13 years before becoming a city council member. And I know intimately that struggle where we faced with Nuestros Niños, the same exact issue. They were about to close. We filed litigation. The de Blasio administration opened up the site again. The pre-K seats went up. And why that shocks me is because I know personally how much of a high-need community that is, where to ensure that so many of the children in a very gentrified neighborhood like Williamsburg, the children can get the services they need, the parents can have childcare, how essential Nuestros Niños' site is, especially that one on South 4th Street. So my questions were, one, is it true that they were notified of the planned closure of the site just a day or 24 hours before the applications went online earlier this year?
And so we notified the providers around 24 to 48 hours prior to the opening of the application in January, correct?
And that's what I mean, but that to me is shocking. For a neighborhood center that is so essential, providing services for families for more than 50 years, low-income families in Williamsburg that are being displaced from their own community, to give them 24 hours of notice of closure for an essential child care center is really shocking to me. And so one question I have is, and this goes to the approach and how we're looking at early child education, one question I have is, before the decision was made to notify them of closure, knowing the statistics, knowing how important this daycare center is to its community, what steps were taken by the city to work with them to make sure all their seats were filled, to make sure there was as much marketing and outreach done as possible to this high needs community? Because the data shows a very different perspective of how important a childcare center like Nuestros Niños is.
So I think there are many important centers throughout this district, and I value the work that Nuestros Niños does. And again, I am required to manage a system that is comprised of almost 4,000 programs, and many of which, 1,700 about, are CBOs. And so there are other providers in and around that community who are also trying to survive. And so as we talk about any of these programs, I think it would be in our interest to talk about all of the providers who are doing the best they can every day. And so I will admit in this space, like I did in others, that the communication absolutely should have been better. What we were hoping for, right, is least harm in regards to allowing the programs to operate into the end of the school year. So although the notification came right before the application, they were not closing immediately. The closures or the end of the program was at the conclusion of this school year. And what we were hoping to avoid, council member, is what happened in some spaces where some staff left. And that would really prohibit them from serving children and families at least until June 30th. And so again, I will admit that the communication around that was not the best. And I will take full ownership of that. And so moving forward, if we are to talk about enrollment, or if we are to talk about city leased properties, my team and I will be the first to be more proactive in how and when we communicate with programs.
And I appreciate that, but I think, it's again a larger problem of how this administration is approaching early childhood education. And I know that there are many centers, but this is all of them, and every community's needs are unique. This is a flagship daycare center within the south side of Williamsburg. And we can't just gloss over, and it's frankly, and I appreciate you're taking responsibility, but speaking more broadly as administration, we can't just gloss over these communication issues for a 50-plus year daycare center that's being told they're going to close, as if that's a mistake and we can just move on. That's not acceptable to the community, to all of us as elected officials. And again, it's very revealing about the approach here. Now, I know that since then, as you mentioned, they've been given an extension to stay open. There's negotiations with the landlord going on. Are those negotiations for a month-to-month tenancy for this site?
No, those are not. Our current leases would allow us to stay month by month, but the landlord would have the right to evict us, which is why we reach out to the landlords to start negotiation, to have their commitment we can stay until the end of the school year. And we're working to execute those lease extensions as soon as possible.
And what is the lease term you all are looking for? Are you looking for a longer lease term than month to month for a renewal for the future?
For those 4 sites, we're looking to extend the lease up until the end of 25-26 school year.
That's very concerning to me, but my final 2 questions are, have you all exhausted all your options to keep this daycare center open before notifying them 24 hours before that they were going to close?
So again, we have to manage a system, right? We're talking about sustaining for the children of today, but also the children of the future, right? And so we cannot continue to expand or support lease costs that are growing year over year without doing some housekeeping and cleaning to make sure that we are being as effective and efficient as possible, right? We are all clear about the stimulus cliff that we experienced with 3K. We are all clear about the changing needs of community, and we have to be responsive and responsible with taxpayer dollars. I'm a steward of those tax dollars, and I cannot, in good conscience, continue to sign 20-year leases for contracts that run a year or 5 years at best. And so we need to really come up with a system that is sustainable and makes sense for communities while allowing us to infuse some flexibility. Things change, and we can't continue to do that if we lock ourselves into these high-value leases.
Understood, but let's look at that system, and that's my final question, is how much is Nuestros Niños owed, as an example, in outstanding contract payments at this point?
And so Nuestros Niños, that contract is on an annual basis. They are, and I'm sorry for the feedback, everyone. And so right now they are going through the contract registration process. Their budget for this particular site, they have 3 sites. This particular site is pending, is already pre-approved in our system, which is a great thing. And so once the contract is registered, we will be able to allow them to begin invoicing on their current year expenses.
But don't they have a backlog of payments they're owed already, kind of like the similar situation?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
Okay, well, I think, it's, let's look into that. I want to make sure they're being paid on their contracts. My understanding was otherwise. But regardless, I don't think we can be closing. Clearly there's a problem of paying late for early childhood centers on contracts. And it's a major issue, and it really impacts their operations. Clearly we know the demand for early childhood education in the city, and it's rising rapidly, especially in low-income communities. And we know how important childcare is for families, for parents, for mothers in the workforce, and how much of an economic driver it can and should be for our city. Given all of those things, to go after and close childcare centers in this critical moment is simply unacceptable to me, to many of our colleagues in this council, and I would want to see a very different approach from the Department of Education, and I really hope that centers like Nuestros Niños and many others continue to stay open so we can meet that need. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. I have a really quick question. Earlier you mentioned about saturations of neighborhood. Have you done an assessment to address the saturation of neighborhoods prior to determining these closures? Because we're all about data, right? Data drives our policy. As a former educator, my data drove how I taught my kids in schools. How is the data driving your assessment on how saturation? Just to piggyback off of Councilmember Shaker's and again, and Nosotros Niños is not the only one. When I first got here, Sheltering Arms closed after 50 years because New York City Public Schools couldn't pay them. And again, we're displacing working families, and we know every dollar we put on early childhood, you get a return of $8. So the investment is very, very important. So I just want to know, what is your ideas around assessing these saturation of neighborhoods, and how do we continue to shift? Because I was watching the mayor when he went up to Albany for Tin Cup. He said there's 30,000 vacant seats. How are we going to shift those seats in neighborhoods that need them and pull them? That's what I mean when I talk about assessment.
Yeah, so one of the considerations we mentioned, Chair, was around community saturation. So we looked at these communities specifically, not just stratified by the community school district, but also the zip code. And we said, how many of these programs exist? How many of these programs exist with the same age range and seat type? And what is their utilization rates? And in each instance, we found that these communities can absorb the capacity, not just the enrollment, the capacity of each of these sites, because there is significant under-enrollment in many of these communities because of that unhealthy competition. It is not as easy to pick up a seat out of one of these sites, maybe 30,000 seats or 3, and move them to another community because of those contracts, because of the way we currently fund, right? As I mentioned, if a provider has 1 kid, but they have the expenses up to 75% of their annualized contract, they are able to draw down on that. And by removing vacant seats from any site's capacity, we are ultimately diminishing and decreasing their annualized value and contract value that they will be paid. And so these contracts are organized on a per pupil basis, so less kids, less money. And so if we're talking about making sure that programs are viable, we are not going to succeed in making them viable if we move seats specifically. And so we have to look at a multi-pronged approach. We have to look at the current contracts. We have to look at what we can modify and configure within the sites. I know some of the sites mentioned, like I said earlier, they just don't have the right seat types. We have to look at the recruitment strategies. I understand what we're saying about New York City Public Schools providing support, and we're committed to do that. But we also know these are independent businesses. Some of them, they operate other programs outside of Early Learn or early childhood, right? And so we look to them to lead their business strategy, as I did in the programs I ran, may it be for early childhood or runaway homeless youth, right? And so we look to them to really guide what they need for their business and their communities. And we are there to support them as much as possible based on the information we have. But it is not that easy to just shift seats without, frankly, destabilizing some of these businesses.
We've already destabilized a lot in early childhood. The question was not answered. How are you assessing neighborhoods in order for this not to happen again? We cannot hear another 5 closures. We cannot afford a childcare deserts in communities that need them. So what is the assessment plan? That's what I would like to hear.
The assessment plan is to continue doing what we did. We're looking at site data. We're looking at current contracts, may it be leases and otherwise. We're looking at community saturation. And so with all of these plans to stabilize the system, it's going to come with a few hard choices. And so what we hope, right, and having conversations with providers, with communities, with you all, is that you can co-create how we make those decisions, but not making a decision is not an option. We have to figure out a plan to stabilize the communities that are underutilized, right? We have communities that are in desperate need of care. We still have childcare deserts in this city.
Yes, we do.
And so how do we meet the needs of those communities while we are, frankly, misusing funds by pumping money into communities that don't have the children? So we have to co-create a strategy that makes sense. And again, it's going to come with some hard choices, but I'm hoping through improved communication, we can do that together.
Communication is the word of the day, like Sesame Street, right? Communication is the word of the day. Councilmember Hanif.
Thank you. I wanted to follow up on the 450 students awaiting early childhood education, special education seats. How many of those students are still awaiting special education seats?
I'm going to call up my colleague, John. Thank you. You were ready.
Thank you for that question, Council Member. Let me just. So, as of the end of January, there were 360 students that were awaiting a self-contained special class seat, and there were additional 90 students who were awaiting an integrated seat.
So that means as of today, 360 are still awaiting.
Yep, that's the data that we have available here today. I'm happy to.
So what's happening to ensure that these students access special education seats?
Well, we're opening some additional classes this year. So there was an investment of $55 million to open additional special class seats across our city. There were 456 seats opened in September. And we're working to open another 284 seats this month and in the weeks the weeks to come to ensure students get access to these seats.
And do you anticipate that all of the students who are now not receiving their care will be in a seat?
We're gonna do the best that we can with the resources that we have available to us. We're gonna work with families to arrange partial services in the form of special education itinerant teacher services, speech, occupational therapy services, as students require, to do the best that we can to serve all students.
Yeah, I mean, this is really disheartening because our students with disabilities, developmental issues shouldn't be getting abandoned like this year after year. I want to build on the issues of the delayed payments for our providers. It was really infuriating and of course sad to hear from Ingrid that she had to take out a loan and the savings of Nuestros Niños is basically depleted. That shouldn't be what 50-year-old providers have to do. So I echo my colleague Shekhar Krishnan's views on this, but what are the new policies you're putting in place to address these issues moving forward? And I have providers in my district who are like at the brink. They're waiting for the reimbursement. And it feels like they can't plan for the future because they feel that their closure is coming up. So I'd like to know what is being developed around new policies, and then what is the targeted repayment timeline for providers?
I'm going to probably ask for more information on that last bit, but some of the work that we're doing, and thank you for that, because a lot of work must be done around our payment processes in general. And so again, some of that is very much contingent around the structure of our contracts. I've heard from some providers, specifically those who used to be under Early Learn, now with us, around shifting how they are reimbursed. I think that also is a point of tension in community, is that we do have this base plus model. It works for some, it doesn't work for others, but it doesn't recognize fixed costs as compared to variable costs. And so looking at that as we reimagine the system is something we should consider. Systems, as I mentioned. And so the current system that we use specifically for our CBOs is a little dated, and it can definitely use an evolution of sorts. And so we are looking right now to release a new system that we hope will improve not just our turnaround time on payments, but also allow providers to see where they are in the queue. Sometimes not knowing is half the battle, right? Or knowing is half the battle. If I don't know if I'm going to get money tomorrow or next week, that adds to the anxiety that many of our providers have, and we want to alleviate that. We also need to build internal capacity within my team so we can improve our communication and how we proactively partner with providers around payments and how quickly we issue and remit those payments. And then lastly, as something I mentioned earlier, being able to provide some back office support separately to our provider community. We are clear and we are aware of the admin responsibility related to these contracts. Some have the ability to do it, others don't. And so nonetheless, folks need to get paid on time. And so we're figuring out ways that we can provide that in the future to individual providers who need it. And so if there are ever any issues around payment, providers are encouraged to reach out to me. I have said that in many spaces. My team doesn't like when I say that, but I invite that if it's helpful. And also, we have to do better, just frankly, at just streamlining process through and through. And so we have bridge loans. I'm sad that Ingrid wasn't aware of our bridge loan process. That's something she could have explored. And we often offer that to programs who are in a contract registration process. I am sad to hear that she's going through that, and I'm sorry, Ingrid, that that's your experience.
Can you just share why she didn't know about the loan? How are these loans being, what's the engagement around outreach?
I cannot speak to why she didn't know, but we often, if a provider reaches out letting us know that they're having cash flow issues, or reaches out to us around contract registration issues, we do inform them about that possibility.
Okay, so the onus is falling on the provider. Glad to hear that there's going to be a new data system. I mean, we are in a moment. Childcare needs and so many more families are in New York City, and we can expect so many more families to be in our city that has so much protections for our people. An archaic system should not be what we're using at this time, and I look forward to learning more about how that's going to work out. And then, how large is your team?
So I have a powerful team of about 550 staff, but the finance team, I will get you that specific number. I do know the actual operations team that support with payments directly is around a team of 65. Full head count, not
and
actual
then
humans.
At what point would you feel that your team is maximized? At how many staff members?
Yeah, it's really looking at the caseloads, right? We really hope for our OAs specifically to have caseloads around 30 per person. They're about double that right now. And so that would require us to hire at least another 20 OAs.
Okay. I understand that DOE added 1,500 3K seats in areas with long wait lists for last year's 3K application process, and by August, all families who applied to 3K on time received an offer. Some of those constituents were in my district and claimed that the seats they secured were all locations far from their homes. And we know that 16% of families did not receive a seat at any of their ranked sites. Could you confirm how many of the added seats are occupied this school year?
I might have to get back to you on the 1,500 specifically. That number I might have to get back to you on.
And then how many total seats is the DOE planning for the upcoming school year? And what adjustments are being made to ensure equitable, accurate distribution of seats so that every child that applies to a 3K seat has access to one?
And so we are anticipating, I believe, around the same number of seats as last year, which I think is around 50,000 3K seats specifically. We are committed to the same option for families who apply by the deadline, that they will get an offer. And so we are continuing forward in those efforts. It's important to note, though, that when we do look at offer data versus actual enrollments, it's significantly less. And so although families are applying for 3K, families are not necessarily enrolling in 3K, even when they are given an offer, based on their preferences. And so we are diving into that data now to best understand the causal factors of that. We are aware that some of the offers were a distance away from the family's preferred location. And again, that's at the crux of why we're trying to reconfigure seat placements so we can better meet the needs of families.
Yeah, I think improving the placements is crucial, and making sure that families have access in close proximity, and not feel that, well, because I have to travel an hour, I'm gonna not enroll in any childcare programs. So looking forward to some incredibly needed reforms to make sure that we hold all of our families fully. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. So on February 14, 2025, there was a report that providers of all five, no, we talked about that. So how did you arrive at the decision to extend these contracts and keeping the school open until 2026?
We heard clearly from community, we heard clearly from you all that these are community staples, and that we really need to, for one, create a figurative table and pull everyone to it to have these conversations. And so we did just that. And so we had meetings with each of the providers to really talk through some viable options. We all agreed. We didn't just decide to do this. This was an agreement. And I'm happy and I'm hopeful for the year to come.
So if, let's say we decide to close this year, the contract expires, are you, what's the chances of you helping them find a more suitable location? That's just a scenario.
Yeah. So again, contracts expire, so we have to talk about a resolicitation of the system. That would include these sites. Again, we have providers across thousands of locations. We have only about 87 leased properties, some of them vacant. We are not in the business of real estate or helping independent businesses find spaces. That is actually inequitable, as based on the majority of our providers who have found their own spaces. However, we will continue to work with them while they are occupying these spaces to make sure that they are successful. And as we have conversations around a future solicitation of the system or even an extension, we will explore those options with the providers.
And we know that you're not renewing, you're doing a month-to-month negotiation with the landlord, is that correct?
We actually have been able to extend the lease until the end of the school year, so now we're not doing month-by-month negotiation with the landlord.
So it's been extended for a full year, it's not a month-to-month, and what happens after that year?
Well, we'll work with the DOE team to figure out the next steps.
What kind of lease agreement applied to the other 4 buildings? What type of lease do you have for the other 4 buildings?
So out of the 5, again, one of them has lease expiration in 2028, so we're all set. The other 4, we're extending the term the same way until the end of the school year.
So what are the total numbers of center-based early childhood education contracts for FY25?
So the number of contracts we have for FY25, it's about 1,505, I believe, is our contract number.
And how many have been registered already?
That I may have to get back to you on, Chair.
And how many budgets have been approved?
That I too will have to get back to you on.
And how many classrooms rosters have been approved?
So we don't approve rosters. We approve individual child records. And so sites are, and actually I'm trying to get you your contract number. And let me get back to your contract number. 1461 contracts are registered, and there are 90 FY25 contract actions pending registration. So I wanted to get back to you on that one. I'll get back to you on the budget number. And so we approve individual child records for our CBOs, not rosters. Again, they're funded on a child per child basis, not per classroom.
Okay. Oh, this is a lot.
Yes, it is.
We've been doing this I've been doing this early childhood dance since I got here in 2022. 2 hearings on payments, delayed, contracts not being, we have to get this right. It can't be the same fight every year, every time, every chance we get. We've been doing this. So that's why we meet every 2 weeks, to improve the sector, to make sure the workforce is there, make sure the seats are available for our students. But I'm finding that sometimes I feel that I'm running in circles as the chair, and it's a little frustrating for me, my committee, my staff, and the providers and New York City families who these things should be non-negotiable for us. These are non-negotiables. We have to come up with non-negotiables. And I'm sure educators can understand that. Just like we have non-negotiables, we have to have non-negotiables in early childhood, where the work has to be done, the system has to be improved, but it's been 3 years. And I'm not listening to any more excuse that we just got here. We're not here. We've been here from day one. And we've been fighting for providers, and we find that it's the same providers are not being paid. I think Nosotros Niños earlier mentioned on the record they are owed $1 million in back pay to pay their staff, to pay rent, keep food on the table for each and every one of these families, and I'm sure every single one of them are women. So how do we do that? And always encourage.
No. And there's 1,094 budgets approved. I wanted to get back to you on your stat.
Thank you. How long does it take when someone applies for a bridge loan to get approved?
That I do not know. I can get back to you on the process. It's not, from what I understand, incredibly lengthy. It's something we do prioritize. Again, we work across agencies for that, and that is a process we actually have staff dedicated to managing. And so I can get back to you on the average time for processing.
And what is the chain of command for addressing invoicing, including providers who contact first? How does the escalation work? How does it work when we escalate? Now you owe her $1 million. When does she get to see that payment?
So I would like to correct that. We do not owe Nuestros Niños $1 million. I think
much do you
Ingrid
owe
also
them?
shared she has not invoiced us yet because her contract is not registered.
And how long is it going to take for her to register that?
So I believe she's in the final stages of her contract registration process. And again, for this particular site, the budget's already pre-approved, which is great.
And how much is that?
The entire budget?
Mm-hmm.
Let me let you know her entire budget amount. And just to answer your question around how much, I believe the budget for it's 1.5 million, I believe is the annualized. But again, that's contingent upon enrollment.
Mm-hmm.
And because it's also EDY, it's contingent upon attendance. And so we cannot verify how much is owed until we are invoiced, because that needs to be based on the actual enrollment and the expenses for that particular month.
So let's if your department had no vacancies for analysis supervisors and other staff to work on the intake, you would have enough staff adding, how much faster can things move?
Yeah, I mean, right now I mentioned caseloads are doubled than what we anticipate, right? And so it would move at half the time currently, and right now we are around 2 weeks in turning around payments. Again, this is a lengthy process, and we need to streamline process. That's something that's going to take coordination across agencies. And again, we have a procurement process that we must follow, which I do think it provides fairness and equity to systems and to individuals, but I do think it's worth evaluating holistically.
If there's a mistake in an invoice and they resubmit the invoice, how long does that take?
Ooh, so it depends what the mistake is, Chair. And so it depends if it's a mistake in kind of reporting one of the budget items or payment items, or it's a mistake in the enrollment. That will require us to go back and open up the system in a different way to allow them to make modifications. Those types of issues, again, assuming they were already paid, it would just be adjusted in the next invoice.
How many staff does it take to process payments?
On average, about 4 to 5 staff to process payments.
So now you have a vacancy. How many, each of your staffers, what's the caseload that they carry now?
They carry around 60 programs.
And you said your head count to make sure that the system would run efficiently is what? What would you need?
Yeah, we would need about, I believe, 60 staff.
And you're currently at what?
We are at 30, let me confirm that right now. Because what I have in front of my mind is the actual head count that we have. Sorry, Chair, trying to confirm the numbers for you. Oh, we have 28 analysts currently.
How many?
28.
And you need how many? 60?
60 would be ideal.
So providers are going to be waiting a long time, y'all. Other than SCA and New York City Public School, what other agency hold leases?
We are responsible for all the leases under New York City Public School.
All the leases fall in your, are there any other sites risk of closure in the same way that these 5 sites are?
There's none currently under consideration, but as you we mentioned before, there are 3 other leases with expiration date in the next 2 years.
Okay. I think Councilmember Shaker had a follow-up question.
I think I just wanted to make the point, I think the chair actually already made it too, that Nuestros Niños, and I think they testified earlier, I know, about their difficulties, was owed $1 million. I mean, on February 5th, the payment of $100K was made to Nuestros Niños, but there's still back pay of about roughly $900,000 left to pay them.
No, that payment was associated with one of the other 2 sites that has a registered contract. The site that we are focusing on here, South 4th, is still pending contract registration.
But has the site that's, with the site that's owed that money, have they gotten that money?
I'm sorry, there's no site within Nuestros Niños that is owed any back pay from us.
So the $1 million, the payment that was made in February, about $100,000, leaving another $900K or so, that's been paid?
So again, I think we're working off of the basis, thinking that we owe them $1 million, which is how you're getting to the net 900. So the providers are billing us on a monthly basis for their programs. And so, again, not verifying that they got a payment in February for $100,000, but if it was, most likely it was based off of a prior invoice. And so I am not aware of, based on my current data, that there is any owed payments. However, the contract for this particular South 4th Street site has not been registered. So to Nuestros Niños' point, they have not been able to invoice us yet, and as a result has not been able to get any payment.
I see, okay. And do you, 2 questions I have for you. One is, when was the last time Nuestros Niños was actually paid on their contract? Do you know when that was?
For the South 4th Street site?
Yeah.
And so I believe they were paid, I can confirm, in FY24, because the contract right now is for FY25. And so let me confirm with my team. I believe the FY24 payment for Nuestros Niños was for their June invoice. And let me confirm when that was paid. Councilmember, let me get back to you on that if you don't mind. I just want to give you an exact date for that FY24 payment.
And you said the contract hadn't been registered yet. What was the reason for the delay in registration?
I don't have the specifics on the kind of the steps in the queue would cause the specific delay, but it is a process, unfortunately, for the contract to go through the different levels of review. And so I can get back to you on what potentially caused the delay. It is also unfortunate that it took this long, and so I acknowledge that.
And
that
so
we are
it's
now in
sitting on
February.
the administration side, and they're not able to collect, they're not able to invoice and get paid on their contract because it hasn't been registered, but the registration is pending for a while because the contract is sitting because of the bureaucratic delays in the registration process.
I'm not going to attribute them to any bureaucratic delays. Again, there are different components that require vendor input as well as the administration. I don't want to say that it was them or us because I don't know, but it is a lengthy process in general. And so, again, just trying to create some efficiencies, that's an area that we can look into. I do want to say for June 2024, that invoice was submitted to us just December 16th of last year, and it was paid on January 23rd.
Got it, okay. Well, I know you can't say it, but I will say it. I mean, I think and having come from a nonprofit organization before and leading one, that the registration process is very arduous and bureaucratic, and it results in massive delays for all kinds of nonprofits, but I think even for early childhood education centers, that creates major issues given the services they're providing.
We agree, and I think the administration also recognizes that. I believe they started a task force specifically for nonprofits to help expedite this process, and so you would not have me disagree with that statement, Councilmember.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Does New York City Public School have funding to open preschool special educations beyond the 284 that they're currently planning to open? If not, have you put in new needs requests through OMB?
So we do not currently have funding to expand preschool special classes beyond the 55 million. We're working closely with OMB and City Hall on need for additional seats and services.
Did you put in for new needs?
We're regularly working alongside our partners. I know one of the things that we're very focused on right now is the 55 million being baseline to ensure that we can continue to sustain these seats that we've opened this school year, and that's a major priority for us.
Thank you for that. Are you also providing related services as these students wait to be seated in special education seats?
We are, and we also acknowledge that there's a need for related service providers, evaluators. There are kind of a need to look at this and ensure that there are resources across the across each part of the special education process. We talked a little bit about that at the January hearing, and that's another area where we're working closely with City Hall and OMB to secure resources to ensure that children have access to speech, occupational therapy, and other related services.
While they wait for seats, thank you. Was all my children under-enrolled in their toddler seats, or the toddler seats under-enrolled in that district, considering there were only 4 toddler sites in that district?
And so all my children has not been under-enrolled in their toddler seats specifically. It's been mostly their 3K and pre-K seats. As for the district, I'm coming, I'm sorry. For toddler in the district, District 27 specifically, although there are 4 sites, again, there goes the oversaturation. There's 52% utilization in the district for toddler seats.
And how are we making sure, again, working with these providers to make sure they're fulfilling these seats?
Again, we really look to the providers to reach out to us to let us know what the reasons are for any under-enrollment. We are here to serve as a support. Again, they know communities better than us. And also, it might be an issue around the seat type. I think what we've said through and through is that communities are changing, and frankly, our toddler seats are EDY. And so those are subject to child care eligibility requirements. And there might be families who do not qualify. And so again, we are encouraging our providers to reach out to have conversations around potential reconfigurations of seats.
Is there any time and point where you gather all the providers together in one room and have conversations with them, ongoing conversation?
That would be a beautiful convening, Chair. I don't know if we would have enough physical or virtual space to do that, but that's something we can definitely consider.
Even on a monthly basis, just to keep up, to make sure they know what's the latest, what's happening in due time, their deadlines, all of those things. Remember, our key word today is communication.
And so we've improved that. And so I think providers can attest to the fact that since me coming back into this division, into this role, we have improved communication significantly. Providers are getting not only just updates around policy matters, but things that they can sign up for, resources. We are sending those out. We are also hiring someone to specifically support with internal and external communications to support providers across all settings, right? I think one of the things we heard from our CBO partners is that there was a gap in communication and communication specific to their world, and so we've improved that significantly.
So I'm not here next year having the same hearing around the same topic. What are SCA's lease requirements that is negotiated on behalf of New York City Public School contracted early childhood education care program? And describe the termination clause for those contracts, and how do landlords of potential sites receive it, and how does these impact programs' ability to secure those sites?
So our standard needs always include a termination clause that is fully disclosed at the time of the negotiation with the landlords. That period can vary depending on the sites and the negotiation other terms with the landlords. It is a standard practice in our lease negotiation. The landlords are fully aware and have been in full cooperation. When we start, as I mentioned, we do start lease negotiation before the expiration date, and since we have caught up with all the leases that expire when we inherit the portfolio, we're now moving forward with a longer time frame to plan ahead.
And how do you decide when to move forward on a lease renewal? What does that look like? What are the factors that allows you to make that decision to renew the lease?
So again, when we inherited the portfolio, we have a third of the lease size with expired lease. Our priority at the point was to extend the leases, so to ensure continuity and stability for the programs. That does not necessarily work with the new goal of right-sizing the system as well as 9C need with our seats. So we're here to support Deputy Chancellor's goal to make sure all the seats are in the right place while serving all the providing seats to kids where needed. So we're having those ongoing conversations much earlier so that we can be planned and aligned in our work negotiating leases.
And does the landlord agree to the property issues? Do they normally fix it, paint it? Is that all on you before the providers are moved into those sites?
Well, first of all those sites already have providers. As part of our lease negotiation to extend the lease, we do employ a team of licensed architects and engineers to very thoroughly evaluate the condition of the space. So as part of the negotiation, we would provide landlords a list of scope items for them to complete. We want to make sure those spaces are well kept and they are safe and secure. There are also sites where we have invested in capital dollars to improve the condition of these facilities. So that's all part of the lease negotiation process and effort.
And you have the final say to move forward on a lease renewal, or that's a decision both New York City Public Schools and SCA
We work together.
You work together. So some of these sites have faced similar situation with lease negotiations in the past. If the site does not have favorable lease condition, what is the protocol for finding new properties for CBOs?
So again, we don't find properties for programs, right? That is not our norm. Mm-hmm. However, in looking at these 5 sites, again, I mentioned we have vacant properties. We did explore if any of those vacant properties are in the same communities, because we would have offered them the option to transition there. We have offered that to a program already who was approaching a lease end date. Those opportunities didn't exist in these cases, and so we weren't able to provide that option. And so we would not normally help an independent business find a site. Again, that's an equitable practice since most of our providers do that on their own. In the case that they did find their own separate site, then we would need to have conversations about the impact on their contract. As you might know, rent is something we do subsidize and support through the per pupil cost. And so if they were able to transition, again, we would have to talk about the details on that. That's something we can consider.
Do you have a broker that does assessments of available properties in neighborhoods so you can find favorable leases for providers?
Again, since it's not our responsibility to provide them the sites, we don't, but we're happy to provide assistance where we can. Again, we do have a very large portfolio of leases, not just for the early childhood center, but for all other leases where we have schools and other programs occupying.
And when leases are up for school buildings, not just early sites, what's the process for that?
It's the same.
It's the same process? You go and negotiate? Because I have a school in my district, the lease is about to be up. I just want to know what the process is.
So typically 6 months or 12 months before lease expiration comes up, we would start our due diligence. We'll do environmental due diligence. We'll have our architects and engineers to evaluate the sites. We'll start negotiation with the landlords. In very rare cases where if the landlord is not doing a good job, be responsible for making the buildings watertight or doing their share. There are rare cases where we have terminated lease and consolidated. Again, if the space is not needed, there are other opportunities to place the program in a better setup.
How often have you terminated a lease, and how many leases have you terminated, for example, because the landlord was not keeping their end of the bargain?
Not often. I think at least I don't have the total number ahead of in front of me.
You can send that to me.
There's one lease we terminated last year for a program in Brooklyn, and working with New York City Public School, we're able to relocate the program to a different location, and it's a better setup for the program.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you,
we
Chair.
appreciate your time.
Thank you. We'll be following up all my questions.
We'll be prepared.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. I'm now opening the hearing for public testimony. I remind members of the public that this is a government proceeding, that decorum shall be observed at all times. As such, members of the public shall remain silent at all times. The witness table is reserved for people who wish to testify. No video recording or photography is allowed from the witness table. Further, members of the public may not present audio or video recording as testimony, but may submit transcripts as such recording to the Sergeant at Arms for the inclusion in the hearing record. If you wish to speak today, here in today's hearing, please fill out an appearance card with Sergeant at Arms and wait to be recognized. When recognized, you'll have 3 minutes to speak in today's oversight topic, DOE's provision of early childhood care center closures. If you have written testimony, additional written testimony you submit for the record, please provide a copy of that testimony to Sergeant at Arms. You may also email written testimonies at testimony@council.nyc.gov within 72 hours of this hearing, and audio and video recordings will not be accepted. I'm calling the first panel, Borough President Antonio Reynoso. Good.
Hello, Chair.
Is it still morning? No, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, yes.
How are you?
I'm doing good. I'm deeply troubled. We're about to go to the public portion, and it happened in my time in the city council, and it's going to happen now. I don't know if one person from the Department of Education
Did they
stayed.
leave?
I think the entire team left.
Oh.
Not even a staff member to take notes for public portion.
Holding at this point? What's the count holding at right now?
Is the count?
Oh, the testimony.
Oh, yeah, same thing.
Same thing,
How many
all right.
people left? It's the same
Oh,
thing.
okay. No worries then. This is public, right? This guy.
Thank you for that, Chair. I really appreciate it. And I really don't know where to start, but what we've seen here is that we're delaying the inevitable, ultimately, is what's happening. Throughout this entire process, we asked the Department of Education if there was something that any of these centers could do to ensure their survivability past the new deadline that has been imposed. Should any of these centers have 95% enrollment, should these leases be negotiated to a decent amount, should the saturation issue not be something of concern, those metrics make it so that we can extend these leases long term, and they did not say yes. I think what's really happening here is that the mayor is punting this down till after the elections. Before, the closures would have happened in June 30th. Now they're going to happen after the election, and I think he's just trying to buy time, considering the childcare closures made a lot of noise, and he was in the press every single day having to answer for this. So I do think it's a political decision. But outside of that, just hearing the DC speak on a lot of issues that are just not factual. Want to be very clear that Grand Street's enrollment, I think they have around, let's say, 68 children. So if they have one children not enrolled, they go below 95%. So they can have 68 children out of 69 and be considered under enrollment in their eyes. The negotiation of the lease for Grand Street Settlement was originally seen as a $30,000 lease going to increase to an $80,000 lease. After we called the landlord said that he is not asking for $45 a square foot, that what he was actually asking for was $27 a square foot, which is more than half of the cost of what the Department of Education is saying. So in Grand Street's case, the saturation is no issue. The landlord is willing to negotiate a lease that's well below the market of what the city of New York is looking for, and they have 100% enrollment, and the city is still not willing to extend their lease. When you do that, they lose all credibility. On the other side, with Nuestros Niños, as you heard from the DC, they went in to reevaluate the amount of seats that they're saying are available in that building. The city of New York, ACS, and the Department of Education have different standards for class size when it comes to students or enrollment for students in ACS than they do for DOE. So they're going in and they're going to right size a lot of these the capacity in these buildings, which makes it so that right now Nuestros Niños is at 76 or 80%, but tomorrow they could be at 90% with the new numbers that they're going to get from capacity within those agencies. And it's just more of the nonsense that they talk about. Nuestros Niños contract it's a what comes first, the chicken or the egg. They're submitting their documents that need to be approved by the Department of Education for them to then apply or submit invoices. And they're playing semantics and saying that they don't owe them $1 million when they absolutely do. The only reason they don't owe money from last year is that the city of New York made a payment the day after an article came out that Nuestros Niños was owed money. The next day they got their money. And it's because these people are responding to the energy in the streets and nothing else. They only respond to organizing. They don't respond to anything else. And the DC, the Deputy Chancellor, has made it very clear that this is about numbers. It's about money. It's not about people. She says they gotta keep talking about right-sizing the system and fixing the system. It's all about the money. Because every single thing we've said, we've clarified across the board. Nuestros Niños has more than 76% enrollment. Their request is not a 20-year lease. She keeps talking about a 20-year lease that doesn't exist. It's a 10-year request from Nuestros Niños. It's a 10-year lease extension at 2 to 3%, which is standard lease renewals under the city of New York. With Grand Street, same thing. They're asking for 15. They understand that the negotiations will happen. They start high and they come low. They don't even want to negotiate. This landlord in Grand Street hasn't had a contract and hasn't met with SCA since 2017. And SCA is saying that there's communication problems. There isn't. The landlord would have loved the contract back then, but SCA was having trouble communicating with them. We called him one time and he told us everything we needed to know. So it looks like the negotiations weren't happening in earnest from SCA side. So they're just being disingenuous. They're not being honest. And I really don't think that we are going to be back here again about these 4 or 5 centers. There is no intention for the city of New York to actually solve for this issue. And it's going to be a problem. And also, if the city of New York believes in universal childcare is something they actually care about, with smaller class sizes coming along with the Department of Education, alongside the need to expand seats for potential universal childcare, we're not going to have spaces in this community. It's going to be at a community that won't have any opportunities to have universal childcare because we would have no spaces. And then when they talk about sites that are available, Nuestros Niños is the only site in the south side of Williamsburg. There is another site about 10 blocks away that's the closest thing to. 10 blocks is not a distance that we would have parents have to travel when they could literally walk 2 blocks to this center. I think it's all made up. We're all wasting time, and what we need to do is organize, which is why we're going to get back to organizing because we don't think this is sufficient, and the Department of Education did nothing here. But I want to thank you, because the problem we have is that if we don't keep bringing attention to this issue, really speaking to the facts, because that's what we're here to do. We've changed all their facts and the outcome stayed the same. All their facts have been changed. They said 4 students in Nuestros Niños. That has changed, doesn't matter. The lease is not $80,000 in Grant Street. It's half of that, doesn't matter. Every time we change something, none of it matters because it never mattered. It's about shutting these centers down, and that's what the city of New York is trying to do. So thank you so much for this hearing, Chairwoman.
You're very welcome, and you know this council is steadfast on early childhood. That's the only way we can get families into back to work and more impacting women. And one of the things we talked about, and even when we talk about equity, this becomes an equity issue. Right? And if we don't invest in early childhood, and as a forever educator, you know that if we don't invest in our early childhood, the top is not going to be strong. Absolutely. So we are steadfast. We are with you. I am with you. I've been here in early childhood since I got here. Absolutely. And Councilmember Stevens said it. For 3 years, it's been our focus. We created a 10-point roadmap on making sure we get it back. Workforce, infant, toddler, early childhood. We won't stop. Right, we won't stop, and we support our working families, my forever educators. Thank you for all that you do in this space. So thank you for always raising, and if need be, we'll be back here again.
All right, thank you so much, Chairwoman. Appreciate it.
Thank you. The next panel is Mabel Sardus. If I mispronounce your name, please forgive me. Gregory Bender. Paula Ngaru. Am I saying that right? If I didn't, please forgive me. And Sharon Brown.
Okay. Hey, how's it going? Good afternoon, Chair Joseph. Thank you for your advocacy around early childhood directors as well as the centers. My name is Mabel Muniz Sardui. I am the Director of Political and External Affairs at CSA. As you know, our membership includes over 160 early childhood educational directors who lead CBOs-based ECE centers. I am here today on behalf of President Henry Rubio to express the deep concerns our members, their students, and their families over the recent announcement of sudden closures of early childhood centers. We stand with the affected families and educators who have called out the city's lack of timely communication, engagement, and possible plans to support families. The DOE's approach to ECE closures contradicts the city's stated commitment to early childhood education. These centers serve as community anchors, and their abrupt closure disrupts lives and upends families. Closures not only create uncertainty for parents who rely on these centers for affordable childcare, but also threatens to displace experienced educators, many of whom have dedicated their entire careers to serving the city's youngest learners. Adding to our union's concern is the lack of public transparency in how these closures were decided, and the lack of timely communication about possible impacts. When the city announced it would not renew their leases, the DOE failed to provide adequate notice to the directors of these centers. Many did not learn about the closures until the day before the parent enrollment portal opened. The DOE has cited declining enrollment as a reason for the closures, but some of these facilities have said that the DOE numbers were wrong. In centers that truly are under enrollment, the city should improve outreach and enrollment efforts. If lease costs are the reason for the closures, the city should work with providers to negotiate lease renewals, secure alternative locations, and/or develop long-term solutions to ensure stability well in advance. The DOE must establish a formalized process for handling ECE closures that includes direct engagement with all stakeholders. Since early childhood centers do not control the enrollment process and projections, the city must take responsibility for providing accurate enrollment projection data instead of cutting programs. The city should increase funding to ensure that no family is left without access to affordable and high-quality early childhood education. Finally, educators who have lost their jobs due to these closures must be given clear pathways for reassignment, ensuring that their expertise is not lost. We are pleased when the city recently reversed the decision to close Nuestros Niños, and hope is that the city will listen to the other communities involved and commit to reopening the other sites. On behalf of the impacted ECE leaders and their families, we depend on these programs. CSA urges the City Council to take appropriate action to protect our early childhood seats and the valuable staff that support these families across New York City. We must push the city to reevaluate the process for projections, enrollment, and expand ECE funding to communities that warrant the need. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chair Joseph, for convening this hearing and for always being such an advocate for early childhood education and for New York City's children. I guess I want to start with something you said. You said we have already destabilized a lot. And providers throughout the system, and I'm sorry to introduce myself, I'm Gregory Brender from the Daycare Council of New York. We're the membership organization of early childhood programs. Providers are feeling this destabilization. The workforce who work so hard and are so underappreciated for the talent and hard work that they provide every day to ensure that children have the care they need and the education they need are feeling this destabilization and the issues that arise from the lack of communication and the lack of fair processes. I want to echo the concerns from you and your colleagues and from CSA about communications. This process has been emblematic of systems in city contracting that don't take into account the humanity of the workforce and the humanity of the people being served by these programs. And the city must develop better processes to treat the nonprofit organizations and small business providers in the early childhood education sector with respect and humanity. And we see this not just in the cuts that are happening to the proposed closures of these 5 centers, but in the budget that we're looking at for FY 2026. The FY 2026 budget that Mayor Adams has proposed and proposed in front of a sign that said, making New York City the best place to raise a family, is a perilous budget for early childhood education. There are massive cuts of $112 million to 3K for all, but there's not the data to justify the low enrollment that the city claims. And there is not a process for even knowing what communities are going to be affected. We need to see these restorations happen, not just at the end of the budget process when programs will have to rush to reopen, but the mayor needs to take action in his executive budget. We're also seeing the elimination of many core programs that the City Council fought for, including Promise NYC and School Day Plus. And we know that the city really must work, since they are citing under enrollment, to close longstanding community-based organizations in high-needs communities. They need to improve their enrollment procedures. In our written testimony, we have some longer recommendations on how to improve enrollment procedures, but I just want to emphasize that the city controls enrollment, so when providers are blamed for under-enrollment, when providers are threatened with closure for under-enrollment, it's not always a process that they can control. Families may be coming to them and saying, we have families, we want to be in your center. and they are not getting through the system in the right way to be in the centers that they know meet the needs of their families. So thank you so much for hosting this hearing and for the urgent work we have ahead of us as a city to ensure that not only can we provide early childhood education, but that we can support the organizations and the workforce who make early childhood education possible.
Thank you, Chair Joseph, and members of the New York City Council Committee on Education for convening today's hearing. My name is Paula Inarga, and I'm a policy analyst at United Neighborhood Houses. UNH is a policy and social change organization representing neighborhood settlement houses that leads advocacy and partners with our members on a broad range of issues, including early childhood education. This decision to close these childcare sites, driven by real estate considerations rather than a fair review of the program's quality, threatens vital early childhood education services for hardworking families. The city has also claimed that the decision was made due to low enrollment, but providers have refuted this, making it clear that their programs have students enrolled, some at full or almost full capacity. These closures are part of a troubling trend of cuts to early childhood programs at a time when affordable childcare remains out of reach for many families, despite repeated promises from Mayor Adams to make New York City the best place to raise a family. The sudden displacement of children and educators will force parents to scramble for alternatives in an already overburdened system and leave staff questioning what their next job will be. This news of center closures came just one day after Mayor Adams' FY26 preliminary budget proposal did not include $197 million currently allocated for the DOE for early childhood education, as well as $25 million for Promise NYC programming at the Administration for Children's Services, a move that could put thousands of early childhood seats at risk of being eliminated by the summer. As of last week, the city announced it is in negotiations to extend the leases for 1 year for these providers. However, this merely delays the issue rather than resolving it, leaving families and providers in the same precarious position in the near future. A long-term commitment is necessary to ensure continuity of care and stability for the children, families, and staff who rely on these programs. In order to address this situation, we urge the city to take immediate action to fully extend these leases and work in partnership with providers to safeguard the future of early childhood education in these communities. Issue clear guidance and protocols around the city's real estate practices and preferences in advance of the next early childhood education procurement. If the city no longer wants to be a leaseholder of early childhood education centers, it must make that clear and give potential providers the chance to find appropriate space and undergo a leasing and construction process. If the city is still open to leasing spaces, it must negotiate leases that cover the full life of the service contract. The city should also conduct a needs assessment and share those results publicly about the state of the early childhood education field in New York City. If these neighborhoods are oversaturated with ECE programs and have fewer eligible children, as the city has stated, it must make that information public so that providers can understand and plan accordingly. This will be crucial ahead of the forthcoming ECE procurement from New York City Public Schools so that providers are proposing programs that are responsive to communities. And lastly, the city should restore $222 million in funding for early childhood education in the FY26 budget. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Sharon Brown. And before I start, remember Israel, defend Israel, release the hostages, let Yahweh's people go. I worked in early childhood care for a little while. I've been in many different industries. The city is not renewing some of them, and they may have a reason why they do not. When I was working in the fields, I didn't see the things that the children were learning during that time was beneficial to them. We're going to be instituting the Bible back in schools and different things like that, and we want it back in the early child care forum also. Prayer and different things like that, and Bible, Judaism, and Christianity. But we do want the government to, the city, to extend the leases, but they have to also offer the things that the children need, like prayer and Bible and things that make them excel. We don't just want them in programs where they're killing time, they're little, so they don't know to say, hey, we can play too, but we should be learning things that put us ahead. We can have fun, yes, but these programs, if they're so easily accessible, why is that? Are they detrimental only because they won't have childcare, meaning someone to babysit? They can find reputable people to babysit. What is so special about these programs, these childcare programs, that the city has to have it? At first I was gonna say, why cut the programs? And that's true, but they also have to be excellent, that the city would say we can't dare cut them because they're so excellent. When the children get out of these programs, they go on to excel and exceed. So yes, we want to make sure that parents don't experience homelessness and joblessness because they can't find childcare. But these programs have to exceed and excel the things that we're used to, the norm. So I would submit that if they're so easily accessible, then they are not performing at such a level where they are needed. They're needed by the city, where the city says this is too important to cut. Or they say there's trillions of them out there and they can just find some other ones. Like they can go down the block to the other child care center. Like if they're all the same and they don't have something special about them to make them stand out. So at this point, whoever is representing it should go back into their programs and make them excel. Thank you.
Thank you. Mabel, how many of these ED executive directors do you have now, and how many do you need? Turn on your mic.
We have 160 early childhood directors currently. I don't have the number for how many we need, but we can get that for you.
Okay, is there I know you mentioned a pay parity issue with?
Yes, that's under negotiation.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Bender, there was something I wanted to ask you. You wanted us to restore funding for $222 million.
So yeah, that's based on a bunch of different, that's the cuts to pre-K, School Day Plus, Promise NYC, and the restoration of the stimulus funds from preschool special education.
Of course. And we're looking for it. You want them baselined, correct?
Yeah, all of these things are things that really should be baselined. I know that for whatever reasons the council has put them in, and we're obviously grateful for that. But for providers to have the stability to operate programs, to hire staff, to ensure contracts are in place, particularly relevant today, to ensure leases are in place in the places that are not city lease sites, having them be part of the executive budget and having them be multi-year contracts is incredibly important, especially now with the workforce facing so much instability. Even when there are situations where, it's the quote-unquote budget dance and we think things are going to be restored, it's an incredible morale problem and respect problem when staff has to be quasi-laid off and then rehired at the last minute due to the sort of vagaries of the city budget process. So that's why it is so important to see baselining of early childhood funding, particularly given the level of infrastructure. These aren't programs that just pop up, right? These are childcare centers, are complex, highly licensed, highly regulated programs. So baselining is incredibly important.
And they go through a rigorous process in order to open, right?
It is a very rigorous process, and understandably, it's the health and safety of New York City's children, but it is an incredibly rigorous process involving multiple city agencies, the health department, the fire department, if they're DOE contractor, if they're NYCPS contractors through NYCPS. So there's a lot of agencies involved and often a lot of different people involved, not just the staff who are permanently running the center, but there may be consultants and architects and other folks involved in ensuring space is ready, and then ensuring that staff is in place, because as you know, the process of clearing people through background checks is not quick or simple either. So when programs open, you need to be fully staffed at every level, directors, support staff, teachers, and you want to ensure that they have the time to do that in place, and they can't necessarily do that, popping up after sort of having to close and then reopen in a very short amount of time.
And we talked about oversaturation in certain neighborhoods. How can we address that?
So providers really know what's happening in their neighborhoods, and I think giving them the flexibility. So allowing them opportunities to propose changes in age and modality. I think the School Day Plus model that's been piloted in the
Through the
last
council.
Through the council, yes, is a great example, because what we've seen is some neighborhoods, they don't necessarily have the demographics to support the extended day, extended year programs because of the income requirements attached to it, but their parents are primarily working parents, and I think we're seeing this particularly in some neighborhoods where you have a lot of people who say commute into Manhattan, but you're further out in Brooklyn, Queens, or Bronx, or Staten Island, and they need a longer day simply because they're working parents. And so allowing providers this flexibility, allowing them to shape their programs based on how they're discovering community need, and recognizing that, yes, community needs changes, but we need to continue to stabilize the small businesses and nonprofit organizations that are providing early childhood, even as you may see demographic changes as neighborhoods experience temporary or even permanent influxes and outfluxes.
Are you in conversation with New York City Public Schools to take a look at the ecosystem and make sure agencies are talking to each other? That's something we don't do.
Yeah,
agencies don't talk to each other.
Always trying to do that, always trying to gauge, early childhood is engaged with so many different city agencies, including now, an office for coordinating it. So always trying to keep those conversations open, and really to make sure that this strong community of providers is a key part of it, because there are great people, you heard from them today, on the ground doing this work, and they really need to be in the conversations about what's happening. And they also need to get, they know a lot of what's happening on the ground, but DOE and other city agencies also need to share data back with them, because if there's decisions being made about services that affect families and affect the workforce, those families and the workforce need to know how those decisions are being made and need to see the data that supports it, or, as may be the case, doesn't support it.
Yeah, because one of the things Councilmember Stevens brought up was ACS. How often do they talk to New York City Public Schools as we assess and we move forward, and how do we make decisions at that time? So that's something that I hope to see improve, and I told them today communication has to be key in order for us to stabilize that workforce that we talk about all the time.
Yeah, because the system is very confusing for parents, and it's, I understand this system for a living, and sometimes I feel like I don't.
And you're confused, right?
And I can be confused, right? So finding ways so that a family could, if they're applying to ACS or if they're applying through HRA, which currently they wouldn't be able to go into the NYCPS contracted programs with that, finding ways to ensure those families can access these programs, which have gone through an RFP process and we know are of quality. We need to have the city coordinated with itself in order to make that happen, and to have a city that makes sure it uses its resources best to serve families.
Because we know that there's different entry points for families to enter the system, so they have to be made accessible. Yep. And that's one of the things I talked a lot about. Parents who may not have access to technology cannot open a My School account. What is available for those parents as alternatives, right?
Yep.
So those are questions I will continue to ask and raise and push New York City Public Schools to do better in making sure that families and providers, right? Providers have to be part of this conversation. It cannot be for them, it has to be with them in order for the system to work, the workforce, to stabilize workforce and to stabilize this whole ecosystem.
And we're so grateful to you for asking those questions, and also making sure that providers can be those points of entries, which I think is just getting more and more important because more and more families are intimidated by dealing with government. And so dealing with a trusted community-based organization can often be the most effective point of entry. So making sure they're empowered to bring families in who want to come into the centers, I think, is a really important change we can make.
And one of the things we've always asked as well is to make sure that parents can sign up at their CBOs, right? I should be able to walk in to a CBO and sign my child up for early childhood without having to go through all of this hoop.
Yes.
So we will continue to push the envelope to improve the system. By the time I leave, we need to perfect the system as much as possible. Thank you all for your testimony here today. Thank you so much to our in-person panelists. If there's anyone else who wishes to testify in the room, please see the Sergeant at Arms in the back, fill out a witness slip. We will now turn to virtual testimony for virtual panelists. Once your name is called, a member of our staff will unmute you, and the Sergeant at Arms will set the timer and give you the go-ahead to begin. Please wait for the Sergeant of Arms to announce that you may begin before delivering your testimony. First panelist, Robert Ramos, followed by Diana Diaz, and
you may begin.
Hello, good morning. Good morning to Chair Joseph and the fellow Education Committee members. My name is Robert Ramos. I am president of Local 205 of DC 37, representing 2,700 daycare workers throughout the city and about 350 centers also. The proposed closure of the 5 childcare centers, Nuestros Niños, Grand Street Settlement, Friends of Crown Heights, Fort Greene Council, and All My Children Daycare, announced by the administration last month, was troubling and disheartening. Workers, directors, along with families, elected officials, and union leaders took to the streets to rally in support of these childcare centers and the need for them in working class communities. We have had constant issues dealing with the Department of Education, DOE, and the city to ensure timely payments, which have been mentioned many times today. This has been an ongoing battle for year after year with the DOE, shortchanging our daycare centers, causing centers to close, causing daycare workers to not get paid for months at a time. We even heard today of stories of one of the directors and many directors taking out bridge loans, or even coming sometimes out of their own pocket to continue their operations until the city comes through with the payments that they are required. These centers are crucial lifelines to working families by providing safe spaces for children to learn and to play. And I like to emphasize learn. These centers are not daycare centers where people are just watching children. We are professionals, we have degrees, masters, and we are here to teach children, not just watch them play and make sure they're okay. That's also what we have to do. But we are here to teach them. And we know that children in daycare centers achieve much more when they're in first, second, third grade than children that don't go to daycare centers. For years, the DOE has been trying to close childcare centers that are under-enrolled. Yet the city is the cause of the under-enrollment. Many times they redirect children to public school classrooms. You have families that want to go to certain centers and the DOE will tell them, well, that school is closer, or that school has spaces, you should go there. And families sometimes do that. That takes away children from us, resulting in us having the vacant spaces that then they want to penalize us for. Furthermore, DOE has closed the enrollment portals for these centers that they're trying to close, leaving parents with no other alternative. Now, I'm happy to hear that they are kind of reopening them again. And most recently, the city was trying to close these 5 centers, not for the under-enrollment, as they say, but because of leases. And these centers have been serving the community for decades, and thousands of children for years. These centers are still owed money, yet the city wants to close them because of leases to save money. We were happy to learn that there's a temporary reprieve.
Thank you for your testimony. Time has expired.
Thank you.
No, he can continue. Go ahead.
Okay. We're happy to learn that there was a temporary reprieve, but we need a long-term solution and not just a Band-Aid fix, as was mentioned earlier. These workers and families deserve more from the city, The city needs to fulfill its commitments to working families by providing safe and affordable childcare centers. We'd like to thank Public Advocate Damani Williams, Borough President Antonio Reynoso, and the various state and city elected officials who are coming out and rallying in support of my members and the families who use these childcare centers. Enough is enough. The city needs to open the enrollment portals and let parents sign up for these centers. And as I said in a press release for the last rally, the dedication of my members in providing services to our city's children while foregoing the security of their next paycheck is a testament to their professionalism and commitment. But it also exposes the DOE's irresponsibility in not providing proper, timely payments and pay them on time. Thank you to Chair Joseph, who has been an early child care champion, and for holding this crucial hearing. And I will take any questions you may have.
Thank you so much. No questions, but thank you so much for your testimony. Is there anyone else on Zoom who wishes to testify? Please use the hand raise feature so a member of our staff can unmute you. No hands. When I came into this position in 2022, I found that early childhood was an unstable workforce. This is our fourth hearing on early childhood, whether it was around payment, delayed payment, now it's on closures. So I will continue as the chair to work with New York City Public Schools to come up with a solution. This cannot be a reoccurring situation for our providers, our families. This destabilizes our workforce, our families in New York City. So thank you all who testified today, and we will continue to work with providers. Thank you.